More energy to dissociate water into hydrogen and oxygen than can be returned when the hydrogen is burned. But these rogue experimenters of today are reporting output from their setups that exceed Faraday's limit many times over, claiming 7 times, 10 times, or even more, producing as much as 1 liter of gas per hour, using just a half a watt of electricity. The factors that seem to contribute to these effects include using a large number of stainless plates close together, the plates rough to facilitate releasing the bubbles, driving the cell using square waves, pulsed DC at kilohertz frequencies, and constantly modifying the frequency to optimize gas production. Moray, who has published 3 seminal books on zero-point energy, recently put forth a scientific model in which he suggests that the excess energy being observed in these unusual electrolysis setups comes from the zero-point energy by producing charged water gas clusters, which somehow achieve a self-organizing criticality that coherently activates and absorbs zero-point energy. The experimental setups are typically rather simple, which is leading to a proliferation of the number of people reproducing and working to improve the effect and its consistency to the point where it can be used to serve as a practical primary energy source, an energy generator that could operate anywhere there is water. Zero-point energy is everywhere in the universe. It is the foundation of the fabric of space. Other groups, such as exogen technologies, are using these processes to purify water. These energy sources could actually produce culinary water as a byproduct. The day of water power via zero-point energy is arriving. Welcome to the future.
A car that runs on water instead of gasoline. Can it be true? Well, inventor Stanley Meyer made an announcement today in Colorado Springs. He says he's come up with a device that will hook up to any engine and allow it to run on good old H2O. News 13's Kurt Goff tonight on the possible impact of the water fuel cell.
Stanley Meyer says the answer to dependence on foreign oil lies all around us. In seawater, tap water, and rainwater. Any kind of H2O, he says, can power just about every type of engine. How? With the water fuel cell. It fits in the palm of his hand, but it could revolutionize the world.
You're talking about a pollution-free, totally new source of energy, the voltage disassociation of water.
The fuel cell converts water into a gas, hydrogen oxygen, which is released in the form of thermo-explosive energy.
So the water fuel injector simply replaces the spark plug. We hook it to a hydrogen computer system which regulates and meters the flow going into the injector. It processes the water in such a way to release this thermal-explosive energy.
The man who invented an engine that can run on water says he's been offered $1 billion in cash by oil-producing countries to sell his patent. So far, he hasn't sold. Environmental specialist Jan Porter talked to the inventor, who thinks that the U.S. auto industry could produce cars that run on water now if they wanted to.
The industrial base of the world is based on the utilization.
Stan Meyer has a car that runs on water, and that's drawing crowds at this year's Extraordinary Science Conference in Colorado Springs. Myers has developed what is called the water fuel cell injector. The injector breaks down the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen is what powers the car.
Basically, all we do is replace the spark plug and replace it with the water fuel cell injector you see right here. We simply feed ordinary non-processed water, or processed water in here, and as the water goes into the injector, it hits a very high pulse voltage frequency, which instantly converts it into thermal explosive energy, and as a result, we can run this car down the road on water.
Meyer's invention was introduced in Britain earlier this month, and now the Brits have followed him here.
We recently took a scientific delegation to witness Stan's work, to really evaluate it, and came back saying, this is one of the most important inventions of the century.
Turn the machine on, Jimmy Klein fires up his hot new invention. His machine emits a flame that feels only slightly warm to the touch. But watch what happens when he touches anything else. Surface of the sun. Heat so intense it takes only seconds to literally burn a hole through charcoal. 3 seconds turns a brass ball to glowing liquid metal. Tungsten lights up like a sparkler. Steel, lead, and other metals slices on contact. Yet the tip of the welder stays cool to the touch.
No other gas will do this.
Denny Klein uses an alternative fuel source once thought impossible. He says people still have trouble believing him when he reveals his liquid fuel.
Water. Take water and electricity, and we break it down through our very unique electrolysis process.
Klein has just patented his process of converting H2O to HHO, producing a gas that combines the atomic power of hydrogen with the chemical stability of water.
It turns right back to water. You see the water running off of this.
Klein originally designed his water-burning engine for cutting metal. He thought his invention would replace volatile acetylene in welding factories. And then one day, as he drove to his laboratory in Clearwater, he thought of another way to burn his HHO gas.
On a 100-mile trip, we use about 4 ounces of water.
Klein says his prototype 1994 Ford Escort can travel exclusively on water, though he currently has it rigged to run as a water and gasoline hybrid.
Simply speaking, we can change the world by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels.
These are equivalent to our...
Pete Dominici is helping Klein take his hydrogen technology patents from a 2-room office in Clearwater to consumer markets around the world.
You know what? Microsoft came out of nowhere, came out of the garage. Why not hydrogen technologies?
The duo is already in negotiations with one U.S. automaker and the U.S. government. Their plans have grown from basic welding with water to powering the entire world from the safest and cleanest fuel on Earth. Craig Patrick, Fox News.
Members of Congress recently invited Denny Klein to Washington to demonstrate his technology. Now his company is currently developing a Hummer for the U.S. military that can run on both water and gasoline. So far, his water-powered engines have passed all performance safety inspections, so all systems appear to be go right now, and gives new meaning to the term running water.
And nothing happened. Where are those cars? I think a lot of us are here because we were fans of Stanley Meyer, and the interesting thing is that Moray B. King has been at this a lot longer than Stanley Meyer ever was. He's been lecturing in this field for the last 40 years. Meanwhile, I want to just share a little anecdote. In the 1980s, I interviewed a German physicist by the name of Wolfgang Ludwig. Has anybody ever heard of Wolfgang? Not even one person. Oh, there he is. One person at the back has heard of Wolfgang Ludwig. He did amazing work in the field of physics, working with energy and healing devices. But when he was a kid, his thesis work was done on the memory of water. And as we know, that's the basis for homeopathy and any number of other technologies, and what is going to be introduced in just a moment here. And he was saying that water could carry information by rearranging the clustering structure of its molecules in response to an energetic input. More recently, Masaru Emoto popularized this phenomenon in photographing beautiful snowflake shapes along with other geometry in response to emotional input into water. Today we learned that water, when subjected to high voltage discharge, can produce another kind of geometric shape, a torus-shaped plasmoid, which can amazingly produce enough force to drive a piston. According to our next speaker, Moray B. King, even hobbyists can now make this water cluster gas, and this gas can run a generator. It's out there. Anybody can do it. What does this mean for the future of our technology? Well, Moray's going to tell us. And he's already told us in some of his books, Tapping the Zero-Point Energy, Quest for Zero-Point Energy, the energy machine of T. Henry Moray. So let's welcome one of the pioneers in this field, Moray B. King.
Thank you, Regina. I want to thank the staff for inviting me back to give a presentation. Unlimited energy right in front of our noses. Can you believe it? I didn't. I was a graduate student in electrical engineering, systems engineering. My professors were I was friendly with them. They were quite proud of the way I worked. And then something abruptly happened. And I fell from the graces, the lofty towers of academia, down into the pit of kookdom. And what happened to me? It was something I read. Back when we had the oil crisis of 1974, I looked out of my window at my apartment in Philadelphia, and I saw the lines of cars to get gasoline. And just then, my roommate, who happened to be a student of general relativity, asked, "Have you seen this?" He brought me the big book by Meisner, Thorne, and Wheeler, Gravitation. And the last 2 chapters of the book were Wheeler's theories of geometric dynamics and talked about virtually limitless energy embedded in the fabric of space, fluctuating at a very, very high rate with incredible energy densities. What's called the zero-point energy or the zero-point fluctuations. And I asked the question, can this become an energy source? So I went to my engineering professors, and they said, never heard of it. None of the engineering professors have heard of it. In fact, most engineers have not heard of it. It's not in their textbooks. And yet the physicists have discovered it. They work with it. And what I found is that we actually have it in our science. It's in our physics. And the engineers just don't know about it. So all we have to do is just learn what's actually there. So we can explain how to tap limitless energy from the zero-point energy. And we can get it using water, of all things. The simplest experiment. And the key to a simple experiment is to have massive replication. And by the time I'm done, you're going to see how to explain it with the standard theories of physics and see how simple the nature of the experiment is. And it's effectively cavitating the water in the popular electrolyzers. What's in common between a car that appears to run on water and an inert gas engine? It is this. Excuse me. An archive form, a micron-sized torus form. We're going to see this 4 times appearing in this talk, twice in water and twice in plasma. And when it appears in plasma, it makes vortex rings called plasmoids. It's like a slinky closing on itself. And they manifest anomalous force and anomalous energy, and it can occur in water gas clusters and inert gas clusters, and we can make it from the collapsing cavitation bubbles. The main ideas are that zero-point energy really exists. Self-organization can occur. When it does occur, it interacts with plasma. It tends to make these vortex rings called plasmoids. They exhibit both anomalous force and anomalous energy. They can cascade to produce larger ones. You can take an energetic matter torus and with an abrupt electrical discharge convert them to plasmoids with a high voltage pulse. And they can clusters can form in both inert gas and in water. What this offers an opportunity to convert something extremely inefficient, the internal combustion engine, where you inject air and water and fuel, you ignite the fuel, the hot air causes the piston to expand, and you waste most of your energy as heat. You're typically 20–25% efficient. However, if we inject these energetic clusters into the internal combustion engine, give them a very abrupt voltage pulse, typically from a discharge capacitor, they make the plasmoids, they exhibit mutual repulsion, they exhibit anomalous force, and they drive the piston with a huge amount of energy, much greater than you would expect, and effectively we're getting it from the zero-point energy. Allows us to retrofit automobiles. That's the big advantage. We can work with the technology today. Every few years or so, there's someone claiming they have a car that runs on water. I like the one coming out of Pakistan. The physics professors jumped all over it. It violates the laws of thermodynamics, but I just love what the reporter said in response. Why all the whining about violating the laws of thermodynamics? What law in Pakistan has not been violated? we got to bring that reporter as one of our prime speakers. You watched the Denny Klein video earlier. It showed, I like to show that because it showed Brown's gas and the anomalies of Brown's gas, but because we're short of time, we just have to keep moving. Very popular projects, these water electrolyzers. They're typically used as boosters. If you go to YouTube, just put in water fuel in the search engine, you find over 500,000 videos now. HHO games, very popular in Florida. They gather together in their big tent and the hobbyists show off what they have. Typically, the dry cells, they separate the plates by gaskets. Very typical. The Anton cell, we'll see later, is a very good cell. Very, very tight gap. We'll see why that's important. You can also feed the water in from the bottom. We'll see why that's important. Sterling Allen made this summary video. The important thing about this video is the website. Every PowerPoint, every presentation I've given on this topic, including this talk, is available for download right now from this website. So you don't have to take notes. You'll get every slide. And all you have to do to get to this website is Google water fuel ZPE. ZPE stands for zero point energy. The names of the gas, this comes from the electrolyzers. Brown's gas, HHO is a popular name, meaning atomic hydrogen and oxygen. It's what Yule Brown thought it was because he was trying to explain why the gas was so energetic. Hydroxy is a popular name, and the correct name in chemistry is oxyhydrogen. But there's a secondary gas. That's the theme of this talk. And it's basically coming from a charged water gas cluster. George Weissman calls it electrically expanded water. He's the one that discovered it first. Omasa gas, he's the furthest ahead on the proper protocol for making it. And Searl and Gorley recognized there's another gas there, so they named it after themselves, SG gas. Nearly everyone out on the web, nearly everyone, believes the energy is coming from hydrogen. But electrolysis cannot yield excess energy. It costs you more energy to break apart the water molecule than you'll ever get back by burning the hydrogen. So it basically violates thermodynamics. That path has actually lost the energy. In fact, in these electrolyzers, you really don't want hydrogen. You want something better. So what's the energy source? Well, we're going to see it's the zero point energy. The zero point energy, back in the 1700s, 1800s, the scientific community believed space was filled with this ether and then the Earth would move relative to it. And it was a very simplistic model. It looked like it was static. And so when they did the Michelson and Morley experiment, they say, gee, if the Earth's going to move relative to it, we would see the ether wind. They didn't see it. It only ruled out one type of ether model. That's the static ether model. They didn't even rule out the drag model, where the ether gets dragged along. So the modern view of the vacuum energy and essentially the ether is fluctuations of electromagnetic field energy. It gives rise to the uncertainty principle, this underlying jitter to everything in quantum mechanics, and it gives rise to pair production. Electron-positron pairs can spontaneously be created from the vacuum, and then they instantly go away. Create, go away, create in this big turbulence. It's well discussed in the standard physics literature. This is a Physical Review, a conservative journal. It's considered the most prestigious journal in the United States, and they discuss zero-point energy in the journal. Can explain why all the quantum effects arise, why the hydrogen atom is stable. It can actually become an energy source without violating thermodynamics. That's a very important paper by Puthoff. It can give rise to gravity and inertia. It controls inertia. That means the fields coming from the zero-point energy can allow a system, a propulsion mechanism to drag whatever is caught in the field as if it didn't have any mass, i.e. a flying saucer type propulsion where you can abruptly undergo hairpin turns without feeling distress from acceleration. So therefore, our physics actually has embedded in it the underlying principles to do flying saucer propulsion. My poor professors are rolling in their grave. So it's called the quantum foam. This is what they call this turbulence. Electrical flux enters and leaves our three-dimensional space in this chaotic fashion. It's more like a plasma, a turbulent plasma. These tiny holes where the flux enters are down at the Planck length, 10 to the minus 33rd centimeters. That's 20 orders of magnitude smaller than the elementary particles. Can self-organization occur in this? At first, the answer would be, no, that's chaos, that's random. Everything decays to randomness. How can that occur? Well, self-organization can occur under certain circumstances. In fact, Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize in 1977 for identifying the circumstances under which a system may evolve from chaos to self-organization. And the system had to require 3 characteristics. It had to be nonlinear, far from equilibrium, and have an energy flux through it. And it turns out the zero-point energy does fulfill these characteristics under certain circumstances. In fact, the energy flux itself comes from a higher dimensional space. Imagine this slot called flatland slot is a plane, and that's our 3-dimensional space. By the way, this comes from brain theory now. They all jumped on board, which is the derivation of string theory, and the word brain means membrane. Our 3-dimensional space is just one of the many parallel universes. This activity is orthogonal to our 3-dimensional space. That's why it appears things pop in and go away, pop in and go away. They're coming from a higher dimension. When the energy passes through, it's incoherent fluctuations. That's the background vacuum fluctuations. When there's a slight tilt to it as it comes through, we call it a polarized vacuum. And when there's vorticity to it, it undergoes, makes the elementary particles. It's as if this flux is the flow of the river, and the vortex is like the whirlpool. So the flow of the river maintains the whirlpool. We see the whirlpool as an elementary particle. And thus, this zero-point energy flux gives rise to every elementary particle. That means it gives rise to all of existence. Other folks have jumped in on it. Brian Greene has written popular books on the nature of multi-dimension universes and the parallel brains. And the Hidden Reality is dedicated to that. And the physicists take this stuff seriously. The engineers think they're off their rockers. They don't believe it. I like Lisa Randall's book. She's a Harvard professor, and she talks about some of the problems they have in physics with the standard model and the other things. She's willing to air their issues, and all their issues come from the zero-point energy, because it looks like we have an infinity embedded within. It's like we have an infinity embedded within a point. And what's really happening is there's just another dimension that's not part of their models. That's why it appears to be infinite. But if they start modeling the other dimension orthogonally, they'll make more coherent models. I like Robert Lockman. He's a Nobel laureate. He is basically on the same idea. He says everything arises from collectives, self-organization from collectives, everything including the laws of physics themselves. And I really applaud it, because that's what's required to get self-organization to come from the vacuum to become both the elementary particles as well as a possible energy source when we take that energy into plasmoids. So basically, to cohere the zero-point energy, we work with Prigogine's principles. We work with a highly nonlinear system like a plasma. We abruptly drive it far from equilibrium using an abrupt pulse. And we maximize the zero-point energy using the ions as well as vortex forms. Now, typical electrons in a conductor are called the conduction band electrons. Its model is an electron cloud, and that electron cloud is essentially in thermodynamic equilibrium with the zero-point energy, and thus we don't see that in our normal circuits. That's why in typical electrical circuits working with just electron conduction do not manifest excess energy. However, the nucleus of an atom, especially in a plasma, exhibits a strong field lines of vacuum polarization converging to it. So abrupt motion of the nuclei, this is why abrupt discharge in a plasma will activate the zero-point energy in a coherent way. So basically, if you have a surge, a very abrupt motion of ions, you can see how we bend that zero-point energy flux into our space, and the component that's aligned with the plane manifests as extra voltage in the system. You seem to have more voltage than you should have, and thus that voltage can be used to extract energy. They see it in experiments, in the collision experiments with ions. They call it exotic vacuum states. And the plasmas in the ion acoustic mode means we're oscillating the ions at acoustical frequencies. They also exhibit large energetic anomalies. Excuse me. The anomalies include large radiant energy spikes, runaway electrons, anomalous heating, and they typically take the form, they notice this even in the fusion experiments, hot fusion experiments. They take the form of some type of plasmoid, some type of ball lightning shape. And they associate that with the anomalies and the energy. So they're seeing it. They're seeing it in the plasma experiments. They just can't say, oh my gosh, I'm getting extra energy. They would be banished. They said, then they'd be joining us. Typically, it's a force-free vortex. It's like a slinky closing on itself. It naturally stabilizes there, as long as you have symmetry to launch them. The plasmoids cohere in the form of an energetic torus. This is a common theme. You've seen this theme quite a bit. The Thrive video stressed this theme. A lot of people have had this vision that the torus form is key to extracting energy. We see it, Nassam Harriman uses a double torus form, and he shows how it can guide the flows on the planet or the sun. It's an archetype. It keeps reappearing over and over and over again. David LaPointe did the same thing. He makes these, with bowl-shaped magnets, he's able to make these torus fields and show how they, in his plasma experiments, create the same shapes that we see out with the Hubble telescope. You see the same shapes. He says these are the archetype form of guiding self-organization is the dual torus. Here's a paper, if you like math, that was sponsored by NASA. It was also speculating there might be a zero-point energy fluctuation coherence. Basically, pair production is these pairs spontaneously come out of the vacuum. That's an incredible self-organization event, right? To make these vortex rings, these elementary charges of that. And these two pairs are entangled, they're coupled to each other. And basically, this is just new this year. The physicists, Maldacena and Susskind, are suggesting entanglement can be modeled by a wormhole connecting the two pieces. And a good analogy for this is the follicosoliton. So if you can imagine that the plane of a swimming pool is like it represents our flat land slot, that represents our three-dimensional universe. There's these counter-rotating vortices that can be made just by scraping a frisbee across the plane. And they're connected by a thin filament. And if you put an ink drop in one of the vortex, it goes in and outlines the filament. Robert Kine made a video. He really talks about it. The follicosoliton is a two-dimensional analogy to that. If we can play this video, please. Push this one. You have to push this one.
The play button on the right.
Play button on the right. Thank you.
It's a virtual particle.
There was a frisbee up the top. We scraped the frisbee along.
Yep. Oh, look at that. That spot completely disappeared when the dimple was superposed right over it. Oh, look at that. That's amazing. It looks like gravitational lensing effect. There goes one dimple, then the other, into the shadow. This will be a keeper. There's some interesting...
Okay, back to the slideshow. So there's an example of an analogy of something occurring in the plane where two separate things are actually coupled together. And that analogy is the point. That's how we get entanglement between electron-positron pairs. Even if they're separated in our three-dimensional space, they're still connected in the higher dimensional space. And if we connect in both directions, up and down, we can actually make a torus that's going orthogonal to the plane. And so thus we have a single entity that appears to be two separate things when looked at from our space, but are actually connected in the higher dimensional space. And this would be called the hypertorus. If you can play that video, this shows you how a hypertorus would rotate in a higher dimensional space, but when it's projected down to 3 space, we see it as an inside-out type rotation, where it goes inside out. Can you? Oh, we won't play it. Just trust me. It takes too long to. Oh, okay. He's getting better. So a higher dimensional rotation, when projected down to 3 space, appears to be inside out. As it goes, but it's actually rotating in a higher dimensional space. And this, by the way, was a criticism of Wheeler's theory at first, because he couldn't explain the complexity of elementary charge, because they know it was some type of double rotation going on, and they kind of just use it math of quantum mechanics to explain it. But in fact, you have to go to sophisticated models like this to actually explain what's going on, and the physics community hasn't quite caught up yet. But when they do, let's just call them a bunch of kooks. Turnabout's fair play. Right? So basically, this higher dimensional flux is orthorotated by the toroid. It's a hyperspatial type of rotation. And that's why we get more energy twisting into our space, and that's why these plasmoid forms yield excess energy. They're orthorotating. Right? Ortho means at right angles. The energy. So thus, we can take any matter torus that's somewhat in a high energy state, give it an abrupt electrical pulse, and boom, we take it in a plasmoid, and at the moment it's converted to a plasmoid, it's orthorotating some of that 0-point energy. So the key is to make those torus. With the experimental evidence, Ken Scholler is one of my heroes. He just passed away this year. He's worked with launching a very simple experiment that launches a micron size charge cluster, or one of these plasmoids at a micron size. He says from the sharp point, just give it a abrupt pulse from a capacitor, and he'll launch one of those ball lightning-like entities, and when it hits a conductor, it makes a crater. What's happening microscopically is a blow-up of the point. A liquid melt. The tip starts to undergo a liquid metal melt. There's a slight protuberance of liquid metal that goes into the ionized corona around the tip. And then the tip blows off, and at the instant it blows off, you can see the circulation symmetrically just naturally makes a torus. Makes a circular flow that makes the vortex rings. That's how they launch the plasmoids. The trouble is, when you work with a solid tip, you'll wear the tip right off. So what Ken does, he made like a fountain pen. He replenishes the tip with liquid metal. So he feeds liquid metal into his launcher, so he doesn't destroy the tip. It just gets replenished each time. So he's able to repeatedly launch these plasmoid forms. He called them electron volitum, stands for Latin for strong charge, EV. Later on, when he was convinced he had excess energy from the 0-point energy itself, he called them exotic vacuum objects, EVOs. They contain about 100 billion electrons, 100,000 ions. The charge-to-mass ratio is always in the form of the electron. It always seems to settle out at that particular value, no matter how big the entity is. It keeps cutting that charge-to-mass ratio. And they contain excessive energy. They can form up into chains into the plasma environment around them. He made positive ones. This is very important because it proves it's not a collection of positrons, because when he hit a metal plate and dissipate, he doesn't get the gamma rays that you would expect from electron-positron annihilation. He's gotten to the essence of what makes charge itself from the vacuum. This self-organized mode that ends up making charge from the clay of the vacuum fluctuations itself. I told him this is the most significant of the experimental finds, because he's getting to the essence of self-organization from the vacuum itself. And once again, the charge-to-mass ratio is like the positron. He makes them in pairs, and they spiral around each other. When they hit the plate, they make a dual crater. He makes dark ones. They go dormant, and it looks like you can't see them anymore, but just another small pulse reactivates them. So we have energy storage in this high energy mode that can be reactivated to exhibit more energy. So that's, you're kind of in a matter cluster mode at that high energy state, which can be reactivated. Keep that in mind when we talk about the water clusters. So basically, here are the anomalies. They like to adhere to dielectrics. They bore holes in high melting point ceramics. And here's the important point. When they do so, it's not from heat. It's like it's a coherent form of energy that makes the atomic bonds just let go. no matter how hot it does. Keep that in mind when we talk about the Brown's gas torch. Even claims of element transmutation and radioactive reduction. And when we talk about Mark Leclerc's work later this afternoon, we're going to see the same claims. The same phenomena is occurring from plasmoids and from what Mark Leclerc has discovered. So we have clusters coherently combine into a vortex or a vortex ring. They can cascade. Ken Shoulders discovered that. If he takes one EV and uses it to stimulate the next launcher down, he can make a bigger one. In fact, if he lines up the launchers, he can make a centimeter-sized one coming off the end. And he didn't like those. They were too big, too powerful. Whenever they hit a piece of metal in the lab, the EMP that would come off of that would fry his equipment. He didn't want to touch the big ones. It was just too dangerous. And by the way, this makes a perfect unipolar switch where you need to get the energy to propagate down and not reflect back. His biggest energetic discovery is not really well known because he didn't publish it, but he shared it verbally with me. He says when he makes a vortex of water through one of the bore holes, the hole's about 10 microns long, and he shoots one of these EV down through that vortex, there's such a coherent pulse of energy that comes through this, it damages anything that it hits. He couldn't figure out a way to tap it. He said the analogy is like shooting a bullet at a windmill blade. It would just go right through. However, we were brainstorming at the Tesla conference with Jeff Hayes, and he's a big proponent of the Tesla turbine. The Tesla turbine works on the principle of just shooting something through the gap, and the boundary layer makes it go. So maybe a Tesla turbine can tap Shoulders' EV water vortex. So that's kind of an exciting possibility. Any type of larger plasma vortexes can cohere the zero-point energy. It's like we entrain the ether into a vortex form, a coherent form. They see it both in the laboratories, of course, the nature of your tornadoes. Means that tornadoes themselves, as well as lightning themselves, could cohere the zero-point energy. It could be zero-point energy activators. In fact, anytime you have any type of abrupt plasma discharge, it's likely to have zero-point energy activation. There's inventions made on this principle. These vortex engines, they make a big vortex and they ionize as much as they can. This is the most suppressed invention of all the inventions. These are flat. You hear about them and then boom, they're gone. Energetic clusters can form in inert gases. This is the basis of the PAP engine. The rare earths, great experiment because they don't combine with anything. They don't combust. And yet, when you make a cluster, if you hit them with a laser, they see this in the standard literature. They exhibit this explosive impulse that comes from them. So they're puzzled by that. What's going on? And they show their structure to these clusters. So you make the clusters by hitting it with a lot of voltage spikes. And that was the basis of the PAP engine. I recommend issue 51 of an Energy magazine that's completely dedicated to the PAP engine. PAP had 4 patents, or 3 patents, on the engine. And Russ Griesel covered this later. Basically had some radioactive material to keep the plasma ionized. It wasn't really the source of the energy. But notice when the chamber closes, when the piston closes up, it's carved to make a large vortex ring. So he has these little clusters that are ionized, the plasmoid clusters, and he cascades them to a large one, a very large one. And I think that's the key to really driving the PAP engine. There's been replication attempts. Bob Rohner has presented at the Tesla conference. Daniel Roberts came in and he said, it's easier if we work with like a turbine. We just have to hit them with the blades. But I'm afraid when we make really good EVs being injected, we'll start to put craters on those blades. Russ Griesel is here with us at the conference. So he could be giving a presentation later, so I'll let him cover this. But he started an open source project. And I highly recommend his paper that was an extraordinary Science and Technologists, just came out this year. It was a very thorough paper. Energetic clusters can form in water. The reason I like water, it's the easiest of experiments. It allows the garage guys to all do it. Everybody can play around with this idea. Peter Granu had an extremely simple experiment. He's an MIT professor, and he's given talks over this for years. This is from one of his talks. And he was able to photograph the plasmoid film with high-speed photography coming from his chamber. His chamber was very simple, just a small water container. And he would do the abrupt discharge from a capacitor. You know how much energy was on the capacitor. He'd throw the weight up in the air and see how high it goes. He says, well, I'm getting almost force. And he mentioned, oh, I also blow out my bolts. And I said, you're blowing out the bolts? You didn't even measure that? Oh, that wouldn't be conservative. I said, oh my gosh, you didn't even get to where the real energy's at. Excuse me. Gary Johnson at Kansas State University, professor, repeated the experiment, but he designed it so his chamber would blow apart, and he made the spherical weights, a hollow chamber, and then when he did the discharge from the capacitor, they go flying up the guide wires. He could photograph how high they went up, and now he proved there's both an energy anomaly and a force anomaly. And he knows how much input energy he had on the capacitor. And the key thing on these experiments, that the discharge has to be very, very abrupt. If it's not abrupt enough, you just get a normal discharge in water, nothing special happens. But there's a certain threshold that would be hit where all this activity happens. Harold Aspin's written about this for years, about the enormous explosive effects from these pulse ion discharges in water. Here's a website where they want to try to use that as a principle. Well, it's pretty tough. If you're starting down at the water, at the ground state, and we're effectively in these big discharges, making plasmoid in the chamber to blow it apart. Stan Meyer was using this as the basis of his final invention, was the injector plug. There was basically a pulse plasmoid device. He would mix water, ionized air, and rare gas. Here's a top view of it. It's kind of like a little shower head. He put the three things in, and boom, he would give it a big spark, and it would have the anomalous force on the piston. It was a complicated device because they had to pre-ionize the air with the laser. Brown's gas is even simpler still. So we're going to say Brown's gas is just not hydrogen, oxygen, but it's that secondary gas, electrically expanded water or charged water gas clusters. We want to see that the modeling fulfills both. It was a welding application that Yule Brown applied to Brown's gas. That's where you notice the anomalies. The big anomaly is a very cool flame. You can quickly pass your hand through it without burning your hand, a little bit above the boiling point of water. It doesn't even boil water, yet it can vaporize tungsten. Look at that temperature, about 10,000 degrees. This was the big clue. It says not one welding torch can come up to the vaporization temperature of tungsten, and this little tiny Brown's gas torch, it's hardly even hot, can do it. It told me everything. It was the key discovery. I said, holy cow, you got yourselves one of those EVs in there. You're making the same thing that Cone Shoulders was making and observing the same thing. It causes the atoms just to let go. It's not heat that's doing the welding. It's a coherent effect coming from the plasmoids, these EV plasmoids. The anomalies pretty well can cut through anything. Claims of element transmutation. We'll get into that when we get to Mark Leclerc's work. The biggie, the cool flame that can sublimate tungsten. It's not addressed in the scientific community. They just ignore this. To me, it's incredible. George Weissman, I credit him for making a discovery called electrically expanded water. He made the announcement in 1996. He said electric shock is observed when the water implodes spontaneously. He's not putting the engine, he just noticed it in storage when it implodes. He'll get electric shock, and there's some type of liquid crystal structure. He was surmising that. There's been some replication. Ron Mitchell replicated this. When you make the secondary gas, it manifests as fog. That's what you see. Most of the time, this is not happening in the electrolyzers. But when it's going really, really well, what George Weissman observes in his transparent electrolyzers, he says when it's going really well, there's lots and lots of turbulence going on and a lot of activity. And you start to see the fog coming off. And he thought, oh, I'm making a lot more hydrogen. But I think it's the other way around. It was the turbulence that caused the cavitation to make the secondary gas. And that's why you see a lot more coming off. It manifests as fog. When you see it coming off, fog coming off your electrolyzers, you know you're on track. The water gas is heavier than air. You can fill a balloon. This is a garage guy experiment. Store the balloon for a day or so. Vent away all the hydrogen. Balloons can't hold hydrogen very well. And it still exhibits the balloon torch experiment. George says just fill a little water bottle with it and carefully turn it over. and take the lid off and let the hydrogen vent away. And then when you spark it, you'll see an imploding ring go down. There's a heavier than air gas stored. That's the secondary gas. It leads to the action item for chemistry departments. Create some Brown's gas, vent away the hydrogen, study the residual gas. Does it burn? Does it still exhibit the Brown's gas torch anomalies? What is that gas? What is its structure? This is straight up chemistry departments. They pretty well have not looked at it except for one. That's Chris Ekman, did it at Idaho State University. And what he did, he found out, gee, it's not diatomic hydrogen, not monatomic hydrogen. It appears to be gaseous water with the excess electrons. And he confirmed the low temperature of the flame and the vaporization of the tungsten. So what we're going to find out, cavitation is the key to making that water gas cluster. Mark LeClaire contacted me in 2011, and it was like a perfect fit. I did not know what the structure was, or what the structure was, and it was his work that gave us the key. Creates microscopic craters, carves trenches, even transmuting of elements, and it creates these water clusters, all from his experiment that manifests excess energy. He connected the dots, and this afternoon we'll talk about his work and his discovery, because if his experimental work repeats, it will change the world, because it's so simple. We know about ultrasonics and sonoluminescence. This is a symmetrical bubble collapse. When we hit water with ultrasonics, typically mixed with some inert gas, the bubble collapses symmetrically, and we see a light getting emitted. This bluish light, if it were thermal, would appear to be at huge temperatures, above 10,000 degrees. It would look, people got excited, says if that's thermal, then we can use this for hot fusion. Now Julian Schwinger, a Nobel Prize winner, said no, that abrupt compression is cohering to zero-point energy. So we got a Nobel laureate suggesting that in the model, and that abrupt correction is actually, compression actually coheres to zero-point energy and gives it off as light. So the good news is we're getting some zero-point energy cohered. The bad news is we're dissipating as light, and we're really not getting that much in this experiment. However, something happens when the bubble is near a surface or an irregularity. Instead of collapsing symmetrically, it starts to form into a torus, and going through the whole of the donut of the torus is the reentrant jet. And all the energy of that collapsing bubble goes to compress down into that reentrant jet, and there's extreme pressure. So we're going from a micron scale down to a nanometer scale. And under those extreme pressures, about 300,000 psi, we form a solid state of water, a macroionic water crystal. And this was the discovery of Mark LeClaire, an expert on cavitation. And he says these carved trenches, and at the tip of it is what he called a plasma bow shock wave. It's the active where he thinks the zero-point energy coherence. And I says, my gosh, that is identical to Ken Shoulder's EVs. It cemented the deal. He made the same phenomena, except using water. What could be simpler? And so there it is. We'll talk about it this afternoon. It manifests as self-acceleration. Ken Shoulders observed this thing as well. If you let it keep running, it keeps accelerating, accelerating, accelerating. They see a propulsion effect going on. It's like this plasmoid is propelling itself and building up extra energy. And that's how it gets to the transmutation. He has to let it build up its energy first before it strikes the surface to cause the nuclear reactions. Here's a model. We'll talk about it that he drew. Basically, there's a linear axis of water molecules. In this solid state, the water molecule is actually 180 degrees apart. It's not as traditional because we're in a solid state form at this point. We're a water crystal. And Chris Ekman discovered a little bit of preliminary evidence of linear water with excess electrons. That's what his discovery was. And he realized that would not be stable just as a lone molecule. It would have to participate in some type of cluster to be stable. And where that type of thing happens is Rydberg matter. This is in the standard literature where a number of atoms participate together in a coherent structure where the electrons are way out at the d orbitals. So the electrons are in a high energy state. Okay. This crystal can actually form into loops. And these loops are stable under 0.5 micron. And so this is basically the model. The electrically expanded water, we have the electrons out at the d orbitals. The hydrogen likes to hug it. The internal structure has the linear water closing into a loop. So everybody's model is fulfilled. You have the torus form. You have the electrically expanded water. This can polarize. They've seen polarization chains. Observed because it's flexible. They've observed these bubbles, but they like to hug each other. Andrea Puharch talks about that. A lot of people thought they were hydrogen bubbles, right? But these are actually the water cluster bubbles. And thus, when you take one of those water crystal rings, hit it with abrupt pulse, boom, we make the plasmoid. So many inventors have cavitated the water inadvertently. Didn't mean to, they just end up doing it. Very typical is electrolysis gas in the narrow gaps. The electrodes have a rough surface. Paul Zaguris made them extremely tight gaps. This is hard to do, under a millimeter. He roughened his plates just by sandblasting. He said they're very important that that 45-degree angle makes a sharp-lipped crater on the plates. So he was the best at making plates. Could make it well. Here's a picture of a sandblaster. And he would just pull water in from the bottom. He actually made a car to run on it, and out would come the gas. He just sucked the water in, out would come the gas from the electrolyzer. Another way to make turbulence is just blow air through it. Archie Blue did that. Didn't know why, right? But it makes the turbulence and it makes the cavitation. A mechanical vibration, as we pointed out in Massa. He intentionally cavitates by jerking paddles, making them jerk very fast. And he's able to run an engine with no air input at all. He's able to store the gas under pressure because it's not hydrogen, and he allows the storage to leak away the hydrogen. And I highly recommend this video. The white gas smoke is generated, so he sees the fog gas. Massa is the closest to having a consistent protocol to generate this gas. Oscillating fields. Exogen technology was lead engineer Stephen Barry Chambers. Stephen Barry Chambers' sister was Marilyn Chambers, who happened to be the wife of Stan Myers. So after Stan died, she took all the plans to her brother. They founded Exogen. He has 3 patents. They're all the same. And what's unusual about his patent? He did one thing unusual. He puts a toroidal coil under the water. Now, who in their right mind does that? Why would you put an electrical component under the water? But to make a long story short, an oscillating toroidal coil will make an oscillating electric field around it, and if you have charged water clusters, they'll oscillate with it, and in that oscillation they'll create the turbulence, which creates the cavitation. Just do it straight up with ultrasonics. Interesting web article here that says not only do you use an ultrasonic transducer, but use some zinc oxide crystals, because that piezoelectric will generate some voltage for you that helps emit a burnable gas that they think is hydrogen. And this came from the University of Wisconsin a couple years ago, that they just some of these piezoelectric crystals in ultrasonic stimulation. So that's a good idea to make that gas. And another improvement is just to sputter the water through the electrolyzer, to go cavitate it and charge it by electrostatic rubbing. This work comes from Provinslick, bubbles and steam electricity. And basically what he describes is thundercloud dynamics. We're mimicking thundercloud dynamics, or the dynamics of a Van de Graaff generator. Same type of dynamics. So we distill water acts as the dielectric belt, and the rough conductive plates act as the cones. So basically, we can start trying these means of cavitating the water. Sputter the water across the bottom of the electrolyzer, use a cavitating pump to circulate the water through the electrolyzers to make a lot more of the clusters. Let the plates vibrate themselves. It's called reed cavitation, like the reeds of a harmonica. And that would help cavitate the water, get circulation and vibrate your apparatus. And so the goal is to use these principles to make a self-running system. Self-running system, it's basically you run a gen set, and you let the output from your generator drive the electronics to drive the electrolyzer. 2 teams have claimed success. There are ways to cheat. You can hide alcohol, any hydrocarbons, so you have to make sure you're not cheating. So if you do it yourself, you know you're not cheating. There's chemical reactions that can work with hydrogen, but because they wanted to go open source, they weren't looking for money. I recommend studying their work because I think these guys were honest. Steve Eaton made an announcement in 2010. It self-ran with the generator, the Troy Belt generator, and he had some power left over to light the bulbs. Here's his device, very narrow gap, 1/32 of an inch. He used a spiral line to cause the water and gas to sputter up like a barbershop pole. He found he had a big one. He didn't know about circulation, so he had to make a large one to get the over-unity effect. Oliver and Valentine worked with a very poor generator. This thing might only be 15% efficient. And they worked with a very good cell with fragile gaskets that could vibrate. And that cell is, I think, the trick of why they were successful. And they rode on an elevator for about 8 minutes in a closed-loop fashion. So, and Stefan Hartmann made a really fun video that we'll show at the very end, spicing in the Apple commercial, because they think, oh, voila, they made the breakthrough and they're trying to share it with the world. So in wrapping up, zero-point energy exists. It can be a it can become an energy source when self-organization occurs, forms the plasmoids, and if you make vortexes of them, you even get more energy coherent. Cavitation makes the reentrant jet, which makes the water crystal that can form into the ring, and then the charged water gas cluster looks like fog. And when we take that cluster and give it an abrupt pulse, we make the plasmoid. And when we have the plasmoids in the internal combustion engine, we make a huge anomalous force that taps the zero-point energy. And our action items: chemistry department, make Brown's gas, remove the hydrogen, what the heck is left? And inventors, make a self-looping system, and then share your information with the world so others can do likewise, because together we will make a new world. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. A couple ads. I've got the cover story of the December issue of Infinite Energy magazine. The books are out there on the table. And this is the website where you can download all the information, every PowerPoint presentation, including this presentation. Just Google water, fuel, ZPE. Thanks again. Oh, yeah. Go ahead and put on Stefan Hartmann's film, because it's fun.
How long is that film? I was going to say, can you take a couple questions?
60 seconds.
Okay. Will you take a couple questions after that, Moray?
Sure.
Yeah, we've got a little time.
Well, how come you were rushing me if we had a little time?
Because you have to answer some questions. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Well, I have two questions. One is, when we were doing this a long time ago, this is like 20 years ago, we started finding when you move the water, weird things happen that made it way, way more efficient. Have they, from what you said here, have they got that down to not quite a science yet where they can get that, like you're saying, the fog every time? Because when we were looking at stuff, we found that maybe 15% of it would be what we call the water gas. It was basically a new form of water, but the rest would be hydrogen and oxygen. With this way, are they getting it like, what percentage of it now is that stuff that isn't hydrogen or oxygen now? What are they able to get up to?
Excellent point. Basically, we don't want to make hydrogen, so what you want to do is cut back the current. Hydrogen proportional to current. You just want high voltage stimulation. So you want to minimize your electrolyte, right? Maximize your turbulence, and maximize your cavitation.
Why don't we go ahead and show this quick film, and then we'll pick up the quick Q&A.
Okay.
Okay?
This, I guess we can answer questions now.
Where can we access this presentation? You already said that.
Google Water Fuel ZPE. And the PezWiki site will be the first hit. It'll be under subsequent material.
Okay. We know about cavitation with ultrasonic. You also mentioned you can create cavitation with vibration on the plates of a fuel cell. Yeah.
Okay, that's your question.
No. Can you use audible frequencies to vibrate the plates and cause cavitation?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you get a little more at ultrasonics, but yes, you can. It can definitely.
Okay.
In fact, I think it happens at all different frequencies. The idea is to get the plates to move together.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, she has the microphone.
You were stating that the particular motor they were using that ran for 8 minutes was a very low efficiency motor, like you're getting 15% efficiency. What about using a higher efficiency motor?
Yeah, like Steve Eaton. Duh. Well, they were working on a very low budget. These are like garage guy hobbyists. In fact, they went to all that trouble to jerry-rig the timing. And you just saw in the video. That was a lot of trouble. I personally would recommend spending a little more money.
You're also saying that those high energy, like water bullets, I'm kind of new to this, but it's kind of water bullets. They said they work better on a turbine, but that will tear up the turbine blades. What about magnetic turbine blades?
Right. This was a Tesla turbine that doesn't have blades. That was a big thing about the Tesla turbine. Yeah, boundary layers. Good point.
I don't actually need to buy it. I can probably just speak up. You mentioned somebody who was creating rough surfaces on their plate before topology. I don't remember who it was, but they said that 45 degrees angle of inclination was enforced when creating the surface topology. Can you elucidate on why, or do you have any ideas?
Yes. With the craters from the strikes from the silicon carbide, this is microscopically, would end up having very sharp lips on the crater. And when you see cavitating pumps like Griggs does in his patent, he stresses the importance of these sharp lips on the edge of the holes, on the irregularities. And Zagoras just lucked into discovering it.
Thank you.
Oh, another question adjacent.
When you're making the HO2 gas and you're getting this fog coming out the extremity, what makes you think that that's not just steam from the heat?
Yeah, well, we'll have to find out what's the temperature of it. On the video of who replicated it, said it was very cool. It was a very cool fog to the touch. So that could be an indication it's not steam.
I have a question about the longitudinal of the Amperian forces when we have a spark gap that was launching a weight into the air in one of the presentations. There's this thing on Amperian forces and closed loop systems. If you do a high current discharge into an electrode that has another electrode on top that is in a closed loop system, you observe a lot more force, newtons of force, than what Maxwell equations allow for. So I'm curious, with producing hydrogen, is there ways to control that to make the ortho and para hydrogens more efficiently so then you get the exact burn you wish? Like how to actually change the molecules either through electrostatic or electromagnetic interferences, like filters going through there.
Okay, to interpret the question, I'll answer by saying the point of the presentation is we don't want hydrogen, either ortho or para. By the way, ortho and para are very close in its enthalpy. The ortho is a little more. 3/4 of normal hydrogen is ortho, and then 1/4 is para.
What was the name of the dipole? Which direction you're changing the dipole?
On the electrodes themselves, Grignot's experiment is just straight across, just pretty simple geometry.
Hey, thanks for being here. Really enjoyed it. If I ran moist air through a 25 kV spark gap, with this click, 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 what would I get?
Well, lightning.
Really? I mean, if you ran that into a car engine, is it going to start getting 90 miles per gallon or what?
I think it'll require a little more than that. We need to get this cluster form. That's my opinion, coming from the cavitation. So if you've got an ultrasonic transducer and we've got some of these cluster forms, and then start sparking that, that fog that comes off, it might get us there. So I'd love to see that as an experiment because it would simplify things all the more. We could get the electrical stimulation out of making the gas, and just say it's coming straight from the fog, from the cavitation fog. But we still might need some electrical input because we're polarizing and we're getting the charge to separate on the cluster itself. So it's not clear yet. Nobody's really tried experiments along the lines that I've been suggesting because they all say, no, it's hydrogen. You're not going to tell me any different, and that's how far I get.
I was under the impression that if you start doing cavitation of aluminum, that you would get transmutation of many, many elements across the periodic table, including the ones above 90, which could be radioactive. And if you start playing those games, you could make yourself sick with radioactivity. You didn't touch on that at all that I heard about, or did I miss it?
You didn't miss it. It's happening at 4:30. Mark LeClaire, the inventor. Tune in at 4:30. 10-2.
I think we have time for just one more question. Anybody?
I was wondering if you, if there was a common frequency that was noticed, or if there were common patterns that were noticed at the moment of cavitation. I would suspect it would have something to do with multiples of gold ratio.
Okay, I can address the frequency question. Basically, what Zagoras got the right idea. We're running these things at kilohertz frequencies, very typical in the kilohertz bands with pulsing, and everybody's thinking, oh, that's the resonance of the water molecule itself. It's not. Water molecule's up there at the terahertz band, but at those frequencies, those are very good frequencies for cavitating. And so what they're doing is they're making the entire apparatus mechanically vibrate at those frequencies. And when you have water and gas coming off and everything else, that characteristic frequency tends to change. And what Zagoras did in his electronics, he would keep changing his stimulation frequency to match the mechanical resonance of the whole system. And thus we do have a resonance, but it's not just of the simple water molecule, it's of the entire apparatus.
Moray, thank you. I think that's it. We're out of time, so let's give a big hand to Moray.
Thank you. And tune in at 4:30 for part 2. We'll drill deep.
And he'll be available for more questions. Everybody here presenting is making themselves very available for questions, so don't hesitate to come up to Moray outside at the table, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Moray.
Where do you have the books?
They're right here under the chair.
Okay.
Get the books out, all 3 of them. Thank you. Okay. We'll have a break after. Does anyone really need a break? Otherwise, we're planning on going straight through for 1 more hour. Are you okay with that? Yes. Okay, good. By the way, speaking of toroids, if any of you are planning on seeing Michael Tellinger's presentation, I think that's on Saturday at 11 o'clock in this room. He's going to be featuring these incredible toroid-shaped stones. No one understands their origins, but they were used in building these very anomalous ancient African stone circles that emanate energy and heat and sound. So more of the toroid to come. Okay, everybody back there, are we ready to go? I'll wait till everyone's seated and we'll get ready for Mike. Okay, can I have your attention? Hello, hello. We're getting ready to go again. So we need to give our attention to our next presenter. I was speaking with our next presenter, Mike Waters, yesterday, and he made the point that our biggest challenge in embracing these new energy technologies is that we're coming from a mindset of lack. With the new technologies, we would be drawing from a sea of unlimited energy. This requires a new assumption on the part of industry, consumerism, and science. He also says we require a new mindset regarding the existing paradigm of physics we operate from right now. In particular, Mike says that the physics involved around wind turbines is backward. In redesigning the blades alone, a relatively simple fix, the industry can move from a 5% efficiency rate to 5 times that rate. His research also extends to helping us understand the causes of and the solutions for the increasing number of diverse global crises now facing us. With that, let's welcome Mike Waters.
Thanks. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Yep. All right. I'd like to thank Karen Elkins, first of all, for helping me with the PowerPoint. I haven't done a PowerPoint presentation before, so bear with me. There's a lot in common, actually, between the work I'm doing and the team we formed and what Moray was talking about. I had no idea, so I'm very anxious to talk to him afterwards. I'll be going into looking at some of the fundamental causes of what got us in here. My primary work is actually with energy and energy technologies over Unity. And I'm going to use the wind industry as an example. It actually gives us a way to look at over Unity in a whole new way. Well, maybe it's hard to say a whole new way because there's so much that's come before us, but maybe we have a simple perspective on how to go over Unity now, and a lot of overlap between some of these examples and what Moray was talking about. So I won't go as in-depth into what he was discussing in my talk. This started for me about 12 years ago, and I started to realize things were a little wrong, and realized that the situations were very complex. I mean, we're facing a lot of crises right now. I think there's a lot of people who are quite concerned. They are very diverse, but there's a synergistic connection between all of them. So in my work, I was looking at finding what was causing all of this, because I saw trouble. And in fact, 10 years ago, you could predict some of the events that have occurred since, a lot of them. And now we're further down the road and we're more in trouble. There's more to deal with. What I came down to realizing was that there are some underlying causes here, and they are quite simple. And I think everybody in this room realizes that energy is one of them. Anyway, got my clicker here. How does this work? Okay. Some of this stuff's actually pretty funny. Of course, I'm British. We have a slightly different sense of humor. We're running out of water on a planet covered with water. And that's even more ironic considering what Moray was talking about. It has an incredible potential to solve a lot of problems. And, okay, so most of the water contains some salt. Well, we've put a man on the moon. Do you think we might be able to figure out how to take salt out of water without spending a lot of money? And the other thing is we kill soil to grow food. That seems a little odd too, because the rest of nature doesn't do this. You know, soil is a very complex ecosystem that sort of supports the plants that grow in it. And that has actually caused havoc also. It's not, you know, everything that happens in nature is pretty synergistic. It went backwards. There's only one button. No, there's two, sorry. Okay, there's some more things that appear to be quite, well, upside down. We borrow money from banks that make it up out of thin air. Now, you can make this as complex as you want, and people do. But that's what we do. You know, that's economics in the modern world. And the banking system is very powerful. I mean, it's a privilege to work with them, is it not? Our medical system profits from illness, and discussing cures is illegal. Well, you've got to make money, and sickness makes a lot of money. But that's pretty sick. Inventors are ridiculed when everything we used was invented by someone. You know, I've got a bit of a problem with that because I'm an inventor, and I know we can be a little quirky and pretty hyper-creative, and some may be harder to deal with than others, but everything we use was invented by someone. And if we're going to progress beyond where we are, we've got to invent more stuff, right? So we've got to keep working with these guys. And we are sacrificing our very survival for short-term gain. And that is exactly the same as cancer. A cancerous organism is one that is doing just that. It's sacrificing the body for its own survival. Short-term survival, because then it dies too. So, here's a sort of an abbreviated list of some of the things we're dealing with, and I won't spend too long on this because it's kind of depressing, but we try to make it funny. I know Karen really helped by adding to this, but they're very broad in effect. I mean, a Carrington event, that was 1859 when the sun kicked off a massive corona discharge and caused havoc. And of course, we didn't have the grid back then. And now we got an antenna designed to pick up something like this, and it would be a lot worse. In fact, NASA's predicted it would take 4 years to recover. But all these things are in fact linked. Resource depletion. Why are we running out of resources? I mean, atoms don't disappear. So, I got more embroiled in this, seeing how complex it was, and you know, it's not just about technologies, it's not just about the ecosystem, it's not just about man. I put ego kind of in bigger letters there because ego is a big problem. But it is not, it's also something that's been created by our culture. We live in a competitive culture, so a competitive culture produces bigger egos. They go together. But anyway, looking at all this, I realized that we've got two things that are really out of whack. And if you look at the motivational path that those two things take us in, if we correct them, it's got a good chance of solving all this stuff automatically. And I think that's why it's important to get some of this stuff out there. I mean, there are some amazing scientists here today, and tomorrow and Saturday. Incredible talents. I mean, in this room alone, there's some incredible people that have done amazing work in this field and probably many others. Imagine what we could do if we pooled our resources. But anyway, these two causes require a different way of thinking. In fact, we've got to reverse a lot of the things we're doing. But this is one of my favorite Einstein sayings. Problems that exist in the world today cannot be solved by the level of thinking that created them. Well, that is absolutely true in this case. And we could talk for an hour about where the stars are in that picture, but I think we should just move on. Okay. It's a pretty harsh picture, isn't it? But it is kind of applicable. These two concepts are, we believe that nature is competitive, dominant, and that energy is a limited resource. So we've invented this thing called fuel. And that, I think, I'm probably preaching to the choir on this stuff, but it is simple. This is not how nature operates. And unfortunately, we tend to look at things in a very simplistic way, very direct. And it's very difficult to look at synergistic systems in that way and come to the right conclusion. So what we're really dealing with is nature is a collaborative system, cooperative system. And unfortunately, we've modeled our business, our economics, on the opposite concept, which is why all these symptoms we're getting are the opposite of what nature has produced. Nature is a synergistic system. It's a very complex one, but it's stable. And it's stable because it collaborates first before it competes. So I'll talk more about that. Energy is abundant, and I think we're seeing more and more evidence of that in this tent and the other. And of course, that's been going on for a long time, but now we've got to find a simple way of looking at this and, again, pull together to make sure we get these things out. So nature. Mathematically, a competitive dominant biological system can only result in a single winner, which then dies. That's basic math, and it's true. So that's what we're doing. The evidence, if you look at it, we're getting larger and larger corporations, larger and larger governments, more desire to control others from a central point. Even some of the people that are trying to lead recovery efforts have a centralized concept of what they're doing. These are all symptoms of this. We live in a competitive culture. In nature, a predator must honor its ecosystem when it predates. If it doesn't, it may not have the same ecosystem. Gee, what are we doing here? You know, we're changing our ecosystem, aren't we? I wanted to mention one thing in particular because I think it's very important. For me, I'm a simplist. I like to find a root cause to something and then get that out there. But two studies in particular. Alan Gregory, TED Talk, I highly recommend everybody go watch that. It's 15 minutes. And what he talks about is profound. He was a man that ended up killing 40,000 elephants, by the way. Tragic story. But maybe as a result, we can prevent what's happening, which is 50% of the landmass of the surface of this planet is going to desert fast. And we are the cause. You know, we may debate global warming, but we are the reason 50% of the landmass, and it's accelerating, is turning to desert, and there is a solution. I don't need to explain that, he can. Yellowstone, very interesting study. Wolves, they killed wolves in Yellowstone for a period, and they found a massive change in the entire layout of the ecosystem. Wolves had a very profound effect on maintaining that balance. And they found the beaver populations died, elk populations died. It's because the wolves were actually contributing to the ecosystem by killing. They kill an elk, and no elk would go near that elk to eat for a long time. So what happens? Trees grow. Trees grow up often next to a stream because the elk ends up at a stream as a last resort, right? Backing into the water. That changes streams. It maintains incredible balance in the ecosystem. Fascinating study. Okay, energy, my favorite subject, and probably most of the people in this room. I'm going to poke some holes in some of our most profound laws, because we have to. It's another basic logic thing. But one thing I like especially, there's enough energy in the space of an empty cup to boil all the oceans of the world. Richard Feynman is a well-known physicist, isn't he? And as size decreases, energy increases. Chemical reactions, nuclear reactions, matter, antimatter, the smaller you go, the more powerful it gets. There was a favorite Einstein quote that turned out not to be an Einstein quote. Everything is energy and that's all there is to it. Well, it's kind of a compilation of what he knew. I'd rather quote Tesla, but I think others at this conference will quote him far better than I. Well, this is what we do with fuel, and that sure makes it expensive, doesn't it? Enough about that. All right, I'm going to talk about wind, and that may seem a little off subject, but it turns out the same formula that shows a wind industry mistake, global wind industry mistake, also gives us a fairly plausible, simple explanation of how to achieve overunity easily. And I've got an example of it. That's why it's important. Okay, wind turbines. Now, I've been a pilot all my life. I've been into aerodynamics. I was into that long before this wonderful field. In an aircraft, you're trying to reduce drag. I used to race sailplanes, and that was vital. If you want to get anywhere, you've got to make sure you reduce drag. And the faster you go, the more drag there is. So drag goes up by the square with velocity. That's pretty basic stuff, right? Bugatti Veyron, fastest production car, 257 miles per hour or something like that. Needs over 1,000 horsepower to do that, and you only need 10 horsepower to go 60. So, pretty clear that formula is correct. But wind turbines are actually dealing with something completely opposite of that. They're anchored to the ground, and they're trying to convert the force of the air into useful electricity, right? Useful force. So in that case, you're using the reverse of that formula, which is wind force increases by the square with velocity. Also pretty simple, also pretty obvious. And the interesting thing about that is, if the wind force is going up by the square with velocity, if you double the speed, and what does this have to do with free energy? Well, if you double the speed, you quadruple the force. If you triple the speed, your force goes up by 9 times. This is an amplification formula. So, efficient design. This is something I came up to blatantly show what an efficient wind turbine should look like, based on the correct physics, not based on trying to figure out what an efficient design looks like without analyzing it. An efficient wind turbine produces energy by maximizing energy differential between the air and the ground. This is done by accelerating every available molecule and directing it to the region of greatest leverage. And that's actually what I'm doing here. Now, the funny thing is the wind turbine industry already does this. It's called a ridge. A ridge is an obstacle that the air has to go around. It's drag. But in doing so, the air has to accelerate. And as it does, force goes up by the square with velocity. Pretty basic. Well, what I'm doing is I've put that on the ridge. That ridge is part of the design now. So I've put an obstacle in the way, big fat plate, forces the air to go around it, which it does. And when it does so, it accelerates. And I'm making sure it accelerates before I use that force. See that? So when it goes through these blades, it's already been accelerated by the drag I created by creating an obstacle. Very simple, right? And you should see this. I've actually brought one. I travel with one in my suitcase. And if anybody wants to see it, fine. We don't have a fan up here, but it works. And if you compare it to a 3-bladed propeller, huge difference. I'm going to go back. Look at these blades. They're long and they're thin, just like sailplanes. And if you think about it, you're trying to make use of all the air going through that circle, right? Well, the only part of the blade that's doing any work is the outer 30%. That's called leverage. You know, if you're trying to undo a nut, you hold the wrench out here, you don't hold it here, right? See how fat the blades are near the center? They're actually creating drag. The tips do all the work. Now, if you look at the total area there and you look at all the air going through that circle, you go, now wait a minute. How much area is those blades for that circle? I think I'd be pretty generous by saying it was under 5%. Could say 3. Let's say 5. So at best, that is 5% efficient. That makes sense? I'm using all the air. And I'm making sure it's going faster when I use it. And that thing takes off like you wouldn't believe. And it cuts in at a much lower speed. And it's not that I've come up with anything special here. What I've done is explain something that's far more important. These are the two conclusions you can reach from this. Far more energy can be extracted from both wind and water sources, and water has 780 times the density of air, by the way. At far lower cost and effort if we use both lift and drag to achieve useful force. This is the one I like. It is possible for thousands of PhDs in a broad range of disciplines to make diametrically incorrect assumptions at a fundamental level. So it's not about wind turbines, they're obsolete, right? But they still have a part to play, I think. Transition. Okay, now knowing that it's possible for our most educated to be wrong, let's look at some other things. Law of conservation of energy, law of thermodynamics, only apply to a closed system. That's the rule, right? The universe is not a closed system. We already know that as things get smaller, energy gets greater, dramatically so. You can't get energy from nothing. How many are sick of hearing that? Closest approximation we have to nothing. I just need a drink. Anyway, I mean, this makes sense, right? I'm trying to say it, a source of almost infinite energy potential. So you can't get energy from a source of almost infinite energy potential, is what we're saying. There is no such thing as perpetual motion. Well, perpetual motion is useless, as most of us know, because you can't get energy out of perpetual motion. It's just running, right? You need acceleration to produce energy. But everything we've ever observed is in perpetual motion. What's an atom? So, that's funny. Okay, so basic thinking about energy is fundamentally flawed. And I quoted this, but that's me. In an infinite universe composed of infinite energy potential, and I apologize for reading what I wrote. If I'd seen Moray before I would have listened to Karen and put in more slides. Infinite energy potential at the smallest scale, the only limit to accessing and utilizing energy is the intelligence with which it is accessed. So we're trying to figure out how to do it, and I think many of us have figured out how to do it. So this is sort of the summation of that and the conclusions that I came to. I don't know. Makes sense to me anyway. Okay, getting into some examples of systems. I'm part of a group. I kind of help glue together all inventors. We have breakthroughs that are over Unity, and we're all collaborating, which is difficult to do in this field sometimes. The more we do it, the better off we're going to be. This one I like a lot because, and I've used it for a very good reason, because I can use the same formula in the wind industry to show how to use, to do that to go over Unity. Remember, it's an amplification formula. It's a very, very simple one. It bears resemblance to Einstein's formula, But this is more about a practical application that is at a very basic level. And in a way, by misinterpreting Einstein's formula, we've decided we can't go to the stars, at least in mainstream. And this implies that you can. Anyway, this is actually the opposite of Grenoux's work and Nanospire and some others that have created a toroidal form that then creates a concentration, almost like a laser, right? That's how the Nanospire approach works. Grenoux's work, he created a charge cluster which shot a pulse, creating amplification. This, we're doing the opposite. This is a good friend of mine in Florida, Richard Aho. He's spent about 5 years developing this technology. It's very simple, it's very direct. We're using off-the-shelf injectors. And I see a lot of synergy between this, the work in cold fusion or LENR, Brillouin, Rossi, Devkathian, and also PAP. And again, similar ties to what Moray was talking about. I don't need to read this. I think you probably read it by now. But we're showing that we can amplify far beyond 100%. What we're actually doing is shooting a jet after accelerating it to over 1,700 meters per second, which is still slower than a water jet cutter. Everybody knows what a water jet cutter maybe is. It's you're using a high-speed water jet to cut through steel. In this case, we're going slower than that, and we're impacting that jet directly onto a surface, at which point, visualize maybe an atomic, well, maybe, the wave that goes out from a vertical impact is a toroid. The amount of pressure differential that is created at that point, the static charges, the forces are very high, and it's happening in an instant. And it's 100% repeatable. It sounds like a piston engine going off. I can't play the video because we don't have internet. I hadn't counted on that. What we're doing is not only creating very high pressure steam without boiling the water at around 20 times over unity, but there's a secondary effect that kicks in, where we're going direct from water to oxyhydrogen or HHO or whatever you want to call these. I think there's many levels to these clusters. I know there was an experiment done by another colleague where he was doing it with just hydrogen alone in a PAP experiment, and found that each successive blast, the power in the hydrogen amplified by an order of magnitude. After a couple of pulses, it blew the top off the test chamber. Sounds familiar? I like this paragraph that Richard came up with. It's well known that both hydraulic power and its effect on fluid are both linear. If you increase the power by a factor of 3, your output expense will increase by a factor of 3. However, since kinetic energy is exponential, the energy derived from the speed of the water molecules in this example will increase by a factor of 9. Force equals mass velocity squared. That simple. So, the term I use to describe a lot of this, I wouldn't call them anomalies anymore, they're too common, is inertial chemistry. If you look at chemical reactions and nuclear reactions, and the vast distance between them in terms of power potential, there's a whole area to play with there. And what I mean by inertial chemistry is just what I described, where you're taking cavitation, high-frequency oscillations, any way you can to shake a molecule apart without using chemical reaction. So in the case of water, oxygen weighs more than hydrogen. It's heavier, right? So if you put it in a high enough inertial state, they will part company. And once they do that, they change their mind. They go, hey, we want to get back together again. So they release a whole bunch of energy and go slamming back together again. You got water. Well, when you burn gasoline, atoms don't disappear, do they? You know, they just go into the air. When we use water like this, we're using the water as an amplifier. And I've become convinced that it's not just water we can do this. I think we could probably do it with probably any element to some extent. But I think that inertial chemistry is something that, the funny thing is you won't find any reference to inertial chemistry in Google at all. But I think this is fundamental to what we're dealing with. Again, I like to keep it simple. And if I can bring something to the table that makes it easier for a broader range of people to understand how basic these concepts are, maybe that will help, because I think it's badly needed. I've seen a lot of cases where we had some exotic energy technology and it took pages of math to explain what was going on. And I don't know about you, but I get a headache from pages of math. So I needed it to be simple. Okay, that impact energy technology, again, is sort of a reverse Grano or reverse nanospire. So they both work. And if you think about it, you could, in fact, set up an exchange where you're creating toroids feeding back and forth between them and releasing energy the whole time. There are so many ways we can do this. And it's fascinating stuff. But at the same time, look what's happening in the world. It's no longer a choice to change to this kind of technology. We don't have, there's no option. If we keep going the direction we're going, this is what gives me hope. This is what gets me up and gets me jazzed every day. So in my own research, I got involved in as many different forms of energy technology as I could. Sterling knows I've always kept pretty low-key, but I'm on his NEST committee now. So I'm trying to come out more. I mean, I haven't talked to a group of people in 20 years. So, but I can go through each one of these. Let's see what time we got. The point being, lightning was mentioned earlier. There is definitely a relationship between all these forms. We're looking at very similar principles. Lightning, I believe, when you're going from the gas to plasma state, you're releasing electrons, and when you come back, you're releasing photons, or maybe the other way around. I think that's also what's happening when we're agitating water with systems like the MIST system, impact energy. And I think that, again, the more we get these various groups together, I would love to get a broader input on these different technologies from all these different directions. This is a synergistic process. But the sodium cycle is an interesting one, which is why I said I think we can do it with other atoms than just water. Another friend of mine has figured out how to burn the sodium in seawater, starting with an electrocoagulation process. So instead of using high impact, we're using frequency in this case to agitate the molecule. And so you're using inertial chemistry to shift one way, and then you're using conventional chemistry to reform the molecule to use it over again. Pretty simple. And as a result, you've used the sodium as your amplifier, and it's released, let's call it ZP energy. Fascinating. I know of several technologies that are able to convert seawater into fresh water and produce a lot of power. Several of them are municipal systems. But what I like about this particular one, this is, and I'm not going to say who it is because I didn't get his permission yet, sorry. But I'm sure he'll be happy to. What I like about this is fully scalable down to a residence. And we need small scale as well as large. The problem with some of the large scale municipal approaches is there are things you have to do, like you can't necessarily shut them down without having to clean out the entire system. But it is possible to produce energy from seawater, obviously, and lots of it. So as a one-stop shop for, say, California, you don't have to get the water from the Colorado, do you? If you can just set these sites up along the coast. All this technology is here. It has been here, which is why we probably need to talk about funding in a little bit. Generators and pulse systems, I believe I'm right in being able to use the same formula to explain how these work as well. A number of these things are coming up, and more so recently. I think what the simple analogy would be is that of a impact wrench. So you've got a stubborn bolt that doesn't want to move. You take an impact wrench to it, it moves, right? But if you think about it, maybe you're using this amplification formula to pulse so that you're hitting the nut with an impulse and then not using that energy all the time. So if you look at a generator the same way and the motor is pulsing, imagine a motor turning at, say, 2,000 RPM, but it's also pulsing at 2,000 RPM. Well, that means it's actually at many, many times a second moving forward at 4,000 RPM and backwards at 0. What are the forces going on in the material when it's doing that? How many G-forces are you pulling on a 1 foot diameter motor at 4,000 RPM? Hundreds and hundreds of Gs. No RPM? 0. So you're oscillating, in fact, gravitationally, between 0 G and hundreds of Gs at many times a second. Well, that sounds a bit like piezo effect to me. But that's a radial force. The pulsing, if you're thinking about the amplification formula, it seems fairly logical to believe that you could, in fact, get a lower powered motor to drive a higher powered generator by smacking it, right? Solid state systems, getting into the explanation of how you do the same thing with electronics. It would be nice if Tesla was up on the stage. But there are similar root forces going on here with electromagnetic approaches. About 8-10 years ago, I got involved in a turbine project. And this was actually right about the time that I learned about the Tesla turbine. And the Tesla turbine is actually where I started into this business. So I've got a fondness for it. But the turbine we were building, there were 3 inventors working together. One turned out to be a crook, which is why that kind of fizzled. But the turbine we built was really interesting because it was basically the inverse of a Tesla turbine. And what was interesting also was that there was almost no exhaust. With a Tesla turbine, you get exhaust. With this turbine, there was almost none, which means the kinetic energy of the molecules was being converted to rotational force at almost 100% efficiency. Well, we're playing with that again. And without saying too much more about it, it's another simple way of using this same basic formula. And you can get materials to cross over certain phase changes. If you can get a liquid to turn to a gas instantly or to a steam, you can use air and water together. There's all kinds of ways. There's some other technologies I haven't mentioned up here that relate more to controlling liquid to gas changes where you're going more into refrigerant cycles. And just as we can produce heat using over unity effects or producing over unity effects, you can also produce cold. So collaboration, back to nature. Okay, so here we are, we figured out a lot of this energy stuff, and it's happening all over the world. But if you look at the history, I mean, again, I'll go back to what Moray was talking about. We're covering a lot of years here, and there's clearly some things that worked, and where are they, right? And we can talk about conspiracy theories and all these other problems, But obviously, the more, if we work together more, I don't think we'd be facing the same difficulty. And the problem with working together in this particular culture, remember, we've been sort of bred to be overly competitive. That's why you have too many narcissists out there. You have too many people thinking that they are important. But in reality, each one of us is a jigsaw piece. And another analogy I like to think of is a quarterback. You wouldn't dare go out onto a field by yourself. You would be pummeled. But we have to break through our egos to work together in a collaborative way. We have to train ourselves. It's sort of like Ego Anonymous. You've got to keep reminding yourself that you have it, you caught it, and you need to monitor, because it's sneaky. You know, it'll say, no, it's not ego. Well, fear is ego too, isn't it? All your negative emotions come from your ego. I'm not saying get rid of it, but in a way it's sort of like you have to completely stop drinking before you bring it under control. If we pay special attention to that, I think what I've seen with this group of inventors that have come together with these various technologies that I'm working with is that we are collaborating. And it wasn't just technologies that I chose to pull this group together. It was watching to see what kind of egos they had. And every single one of them is about working together. That is the difference. So if we can sort of spread that disease, you know, maybe we can expand that. I mean, imagine if we all got together somehow. You know, there's another problem, right? If you've got two people talking, they can solve all the problems in the world, right? In about half an hour. Then you add another person, then you add another person, and the IQ level goes like this. Each time you add another person, the IQ drops again until you get sheep, right? Sheeple. And then they don't know that they should be looking for the hole in the fence, and they're quite happy to get on the slaughterhouse truck. So, abundant energy leads to an abundance-based economic system. I think that's pretty obvious. If you're starting from abundance, and energy can give us this. If you've got energy, you've got food, you've got water, anywhere on the planet. I like the sound of that. If you're not having to worry about fuel, wow. I mean, 80% of the world's population is in poverty. 80%. We're decimating our environments, we're depleting our resources, even though atoms don't disappear, right? Mining, I love. We go out into nature and we dig up this stuff, right? And often it's a small percentage of what we're looking for, so we leave the rest sort of lying on the ground. And then we use it in our culture, and we get tired of it or it breaks, and then we dig another hole in the ground and we bury it all again, right? So where should we be mining? I'm into plasma for that reason, because plasma holds the promise of mining our landfills, mining our sewage systems, mining all the toxic crap we've created and have to clean up now, because if we don't, I don't need to go on about that. But you see how, and again, you know, I'm sure many people realize this, but you see how free energy and collaborative thinking are so tied together. There's another factor. This competitive dominant culture has created a high percentage of linear thinkers and a low percentage of synergistic thinkers. So how many people are comfortable looking at the world as a system and trying to unravel all the issues that are going on so they can understand enough to know that one specific area they can make the right decision? The system, the culture that we've created restricts that kind of thinking, and yet we can make a cell phone. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been told, well, we need to focus on just one thing. We don't want to be thinking about too many things here. We just need to do this. You know, we've got this lake to clean up. It's not about the planet. We just got this lake. Well, if you did that with a cell phone, you'd have this. And I can't make a call on this. And if you went to war as a linear thinker, you'd lose. Because the other guy is amassing all their arsenal at the same time. So synergy, even in a competitive system, I mean, I'm amazed with that higher percentage of linear thinkers, we can still achieve this kind of thing. What time have I got gone? Okay. LifePod is a conclusion. Again, I'm a simplist. So I was working with a lot of sustainable community designs. I used to build houses a long time ago. And I started looking at what we were doing and realizing that they're fantastic. We need sustainable communities. We need these demonstration, these templates to show us how we can live in the future, especially if we use free energy, because it cuts through all the complexity of a traditional, boring, sustainable community where you're trying to use wind and solar. Don't get me started. But then I realized that that doesn't make a dent in the real problem, which is everybody else. Everybody already lives in a home. They're stuck where they are. So I came up with the LifePod as a way to deal with that. And it is absolutely dependent on free energy systems. But it also gives you a sneaky way to release them. So all a LifePod is, well, it is a strategic tool from my perspective. It's become one of my more important projects that I'd like to get going as soon as we get some of the energy stuff out. What it is a single unit that gives you energy, food, and water. It's like a living pantry. And we have enough agricultural technologies now that this is easy. You can do it in about a 7x10 or 7x12 trailer, feed a family of 5. And you can pull all the water you need out of the air. It's very simple. I wanted to make it portable because we've seen enough disasters to know that you need to leave sometimes, right? You can't always depend on your house being your last point of defense, especially if the water's coming up or the starving hordes are coming over your fence. So that's the simple concept of it. And there is a certain logic to it that isn't quite obvious. If you look at the typical costs of American homes, just as an example, you're probably spending on average $300 to $400 a month on energy. Some pay a lot more, some pay a little less. You're probably spending, $600 to $1,000 on food every month. So you're looking at around $1,000, $1,500 a month. Or if you're skimping, $700 for a family. Well, if you've got this kind of technology and your house is now self-sufficient on your basic needs, you need to decentralize basic needs, then you're actually going to be able to do this at no cost, right? Because if you finance something like this, and let's say it costs you 15 grand, you're going to be paying a couple $100 a month. But you've got all your basic needs met, your food and your water and your energy. And you're not having to drink chlorine or fluoride or any of that other crap they stick in the water systems. But the no-cost thing makes it interesting. In fact, if we work with the local utility companies, I'm talking about the co-ops. There's several thousand in the US alone. They are motivated to get the best price on their energy. And they're not opposed to setting up their own grid system. So if you do a sneak attack and you put these kinds of things in, a certain number of houses have generators on, and you can actually feed 25 times the average use of the American home on its rated line to the house, back to the grid. So they're usually 50 kilowatt lines, and we typically use 2 kilowatts. That's income. And if you have to leave. Okay. Funding. Yeah. Well, for me, it's back to the wind industry. I'm working with a couple of wind turbine companies now, and got the attention of some of the larger entities in the field. And we don't even have to go into the more advanced stuff, but some of them are. They get it. And it is relatively easy to get power purchase agreements for wind and for solar all over the world. And you'll be paid very well. With these kinds of technologies, we have between a 20 and 100 times advantage in cost over wind or solar technologies. So that means wind turbine companies, solar companies, coal companies can be customers, can be people we collaborate with. I have no interest, I don't even believe in the competitive dominant business structure at all. All I see is damage. And I have taken my share, believe me. You try to help people very often and you'll get a predatory response. It's just the way the system is. It's not about blame. So if you look at what we actually have, again, you take the people in this room, we say, right, we've got these technologies, we pull our resources, get them built, tie them in with wind turbines, solar farms, and by the way, you can approach a coal company. Haven't done this yet, but imagine going into a coal company and say, right, we're going to double the salary of everybody that works here, and all you have to do is stop using coal. We're going to use another system to produce your heat, drive your turbines. Pretty simple, right? In fact, it's profitable enough that you could trace that entire economic system back to the mine and pay everybody to stop digging it up. Go live your dreams, go fix your car, convert it. So I see that as a mechanism. And then if you look at the fact that, I mean, Nanospire is one example. I've spent about 8 years researching mining technologies as well, because the physics is similar, and I'm sure many of you know about ORME state materials. So you have solid, liquid, gas, plasma, and ORME, which is, I consider, the fifth state of matter. And that really, anybody that's looked into that knows it takes you really way down the rabbit hole, which makes it really fun. So mining is critical. Everything man uses is dug out of the ground or grown on the surface, right? So we can't just fix this and not worry about mining. We could talk about mining and the various technologies we can apply right now. But the point is, it's extremely profitable. Mining is a second leg for energy. So I believe that if we can launch collaborative energy implementation and bring mining into that as soon as possible, we've got two solid income streams with which to fund a gentle transition, a rapid gentle transition at a global level. The energy market, or any other market, is far too large for any single entity. And we get back to the competitive paradigm and what I've seen sometimes in this field where people just think, okay, our organization is going to go fix the world. Good luck with that. How about you and 1,000 others making a start? And so this isn't just about getting people to collaborate, it's about getting corporate structures to collaborate. And the only way that's going to happen is for corporations to understand the incredible profit potential of collaboration. But for instance, one city alone, if you were to convert at only 1,000 megawatts a year, at $1 billion profit per year, it would take you 22 years for your average city to meet today's energy demands for grid, not including heat, not including transportation. That's a lot of money. Now, why would anybody want any more than that? That's one city. So anybody that has global aspirations of controlling a single technology in a global market needs to be talked to. So, corporations, organizations, and empires I think there is such a thing as a collaborative empire. I think we can pull that off, but again, I think we need to watch our egos intently. They should serve people, communities, and ecosystems. So this is basically the summation of what I hope I got across. I have a website that goes into it if I wasn't clear about some things. But I hope that this will at least help with some guidelines. You know, there's a lot of great people here. This is just my part. So, any questions?
You mentioned Orme, matter, and can you spell that?
Oh, O-R-M-E, or O-R-M-U-S. No. I got a pointer. Any other questions? Wow, good. Oh.
In your drag calculations on your windmill blades, did you count the drag of all the birds getting chopped up?
No. You know, we better go back because that is, you know, if a liquid is 780 times more dense than air than a solid, I think they clean up about, what, 50 raptors a month per wind turbine in the early hours in Tehachapi.
I thought it was ironic they had a deal up in Wyoming where they were chopping up the bald eagles, the symbol of America. But they wouldn't allow that into, you know, the newspaper.
Oh, we do it to everything else. Why not bald eagles?
Exactly. Equal opportunity.
So.
One more question, one or two, I think. Okay. Oh, here we go. Oh, she wants to know more about the life pods. I think we all do.
We need funding. It's a synergistic system again. I mean, I've found dozens and dozens of remarkable agricultural breakthroughs. Amazing stuff, going way back. I'm sure a lot of others have too. Water technologies are mind-blowing. You can cure, I shouldn't say cure, you can make some symptoms go away. You can do things with frequency. You can do amazing things. If you've got a single portable system, a trailer that can be towed by a small car, that is a solution for this kind of country. But actually the extension of that is a flask. If you've got something a little bigger than this that is constantly pulling water out of the air, that's called a dehumidifier, right? But if you've got a power source, you can do that, right? So now you've got a flask that always stays full of water. Now, do you think we could be smart enough to add microbial life to this? So now you're running off, maybe toss a little soil into a chamber or something once in a while, or root mat or something, and you're running off sun or full spectrum LED lighting. It's possible to reduce the life pod concept down to a rescue flask. That's where I'd like to see that go.
Okay, sounding like utopia to me. I don't think we have time for any more. Oh, one more question? Yeah, Searl.
About the wind turbine, I don't know of any birds that go crashing into walls, and that's what they're going to see. With a 3-crop, they see clear space.
Yes.
And that's why they get chopped.
Yeah, this other design is an obstacle. They don't go near them, I hope. So, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Mike. I want a life pod. All we need is a 3D printer to print out those life pods now, right? Okay, the Searl team's up next. We have about 15 minutes to take a little break, and we'll see you back here.
I think I've had like 8-9 hours sleep 5 days. So
Sunday morning.
like what I said.
With various examples.
then I'm going to be whatever, filming like famous or rich or whatever. And we move to a space where we incentivize that the more explicit collaboration you evidence, the more social wealth is aggregated. You know, so it is. It's actually taking that whole system and bringing it, which is some of the heresy that I would be promoting. Yeah. That's the breakthrough. Yeah. I do not, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah,
and he's got another one tonight.
We got two of them so far. We're supposed to get
No, what I mean is
the other 10.
I always feel better. I always feel better when another human being is deeply affected. I just think that there is so much
check, 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 check.
We're going to have a team of individuals up here. Russell Anderson will introduce them. I'll explain what's going on in just a sec. John Searl is just a wee bit under the weather right now, and we're hoping to get him in via Skype the last 15 minutes, which would be wonderful for us to be able to have his presence here. If we can't do that, everybody else on his team that's working with them is here. So I just want to let you know that's what's supposed to happen, but it won't happen until the last few minutes of the presentation. Are we about mic'd up over there? Looks like it, okay. So this lecture is going to deal with the history and practicality of anti-gravity propulsion devices and systems, which have been around for decades. What this means is artificial gravity, or electromagnetic propulsion. Through the magic of Skype, if we're lucky, we will have John Searl with us today. We're also going to have Jason Verbelli here. I think he's out of breath. He just ran over here in his alligator shoes from the other room after introducing someone. And they're going to take us on a little trip through time with the works of Nikola Tesla, Thomas Townsend Brown, and the Searl effect generator, the extension of this being propulsion in space. So once he's ready to roll here, he's having a little private conversation with the team. They're working it out. Okay, you got the handshake, you got the nod. Okay, let's welcome Russell Anderson and his teammates, including Jason Verbelli, part of the Searl team.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Russell Anderson. I've been working with Professor John Searl for the past 6 years, and right now I'd like to call all the members of Team Searl who are up here, who are here today. Mr. Bradley Lockerman, Jason Verbelli works at Searl Magnetics in San Diego also. I'll be going there soon to work full-time in another month. Here's Mr. Bradley Lockerman. I'd like to get Mr. Sam Mason, without whose help this presentation would not be possible. Sam, amazing. I'd like to get, if Mr. Craig Ricketts is here. Craig, are you here?
Yep.
Mr. Craig Ricketts. Is Fernando Morris here,
Yep.
One of our chief engineers. We are Team Searl. We're all under the banner of Searl Technologies, or STI. Is Mike Windle here? Mike Windle is a very important part of Searl Technologies, and we are determined individuals working under Professor John Searl, and as determined individuals, we are going to get results. We are getting results, and this is our best year ever. And if we could all join hands. Power to the people. This technology is here now, today, and it's very low tech. It's very low tech, and we can have this. And without further ado, I'll get started with the presentation. Thanks, guys. And girl. Thank you. Well, let's see. The idea of anti-gravity, which is really artificial gravity. Anti-gravity is a very, very poor nomenclature. Anti implies you're destroying something. We're not destroying gravity. We are just accessing artificial gravity. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, both special and general, which has some holes, but it also has some very good points. You can either access gravity with a very large localized concentration of mass, or a very large localized concentration of energy. And for artificial gravity, we're obviously going to use a very large localized concentration of electromagnetic energy. Now, see if this clicker will work. That's me. The title is Artificial Gravity, which is Electromagnetic Propulsion. That's me, Russell Anderson, CEO of Searl Aerospace. In another month, I'll be in San Diego working full-time on the SEG, the Searl effect generator, by Professor John R.R. Searl, who's our boss in England. He's a fantastic gentleman, nicest gentleman you'd ever want to meet, smartest gentleman, and he's got quite a head on his shoulders. Now, that's the proud logo, the swallow. Seek with all learning, love overrules war. That's our motto. That's our motto. With this technology, we can bring people together. There will be no more wars for oil. And we can have a cheap, safe, low-cost, and very efficient space program utilizing the electrogravitic technology of Professor John Searl and the ancillary technologies of people like Thomas Townsend Brown. Now, that's me in the upper left-hand corner back in the year 2000 with a couple of Biefeld-Brown discs that are 1 meter diameter that I built way back in the 1990s, and got working with a power supply, high voltage, low amperage power supply that I built from a kit. And there's the one of the discoverers of electrogravity, one of the fathers of electrogravity, along with Mr. Nikola Tesla, Dr. Tesla, Thomas Townsend Brown, holding about a 1 meter diameter, one of his famous flying saucers, which I replicated right from the patent. It's very, very powerful. In fact, it is over unity because more force is created in these devices than is input in electrical energy. Way more force. This should be taught in our schools, but I've been helping to rectify that oversight, whether deliberate or accidental, by being in schools since the year 2002, teaching kids how to win science fairs with electrogravitic technology. Now, that's the discs that you saw at a demonstration. That was at the second anti-gravity conference held by Mr. Jim Cox of Anti-Gravity and Space Drive News in downtown Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Library. This was June 24th of the year 2000, so this is about almost 13 and a half years ago. And those are just being powered, going around the maypole that just copied right from the patent. That's a custom designed tower and rotor apparatus that I built. They get up and move, from a standing start. As soon as you hit the variac, hit the switch, they're off and going. And we did an experiment also where later on in the presentation we sealed them up in plastic bags, and they still rotated, but they rotated backwards, which is really odd because we didn't reduce polarity, or reverse polarity, I'm sorry. But these produce a weird field that ionizes everything around it in an 80-foot radius. Everything will get ionized, even body tissue. So you go touch someone who's not ionized yet, you get a spark that equalizes the potentials. Obviously, when I was a lot better shape, maybe with some electrogravitics I'll get back into shape. But anyway, yeah, that was the presentation back in the year 2000. Try to go faster because I know we don't have a whole heck of a lot of time. But a lot of people say, well, patents don't work. You can't trust that. In my experience, patents work very well indeed. You just got to get off your butt and build them. And we are building this and flying these. And these are just for horizontal propulsion. But you can stop by our SEG, Searl, STI booth, SMI, STI, SAC booths, and see the levitating flying version of that, which uses a little less power for safety. You do not want to touch these. These are flying capacitors, so even after they're de-energized, they still hold on to a little bit of charge. And that's my lab partner for 26 years, David Rossignoli, who has worked at Lockheed Martin since he got out of college. And I guess that's about 18 years ago. So what he's doing is that rod has a wire on it. It's connected to the main ground of the building to discharge them. So I can touch them safely, to put plastic bags around them to test for ion wind. We could never feel even the slightest breeze from these things, but yet they get up and move. And Townsend Brown, Thomas Townsend Brown, did some very important vacuum chamber work in Hawaii, in Paris, France in 1955 saw that they worked more efficiently in vacuum, and the efficiency was so great that in November of 1955, the U.S. Air Force classified the entire subject. And that explains why it's not taught in schools, but it's very fundamental. So electrogravitics is lift and propulsion without aerodynamics or internal combustion. No fuel, no moving parts, no pollution. Sounds like what we all want. Now, these are some government aerodynes. Some of them are electrogravitic, some of them are aerodynamic. Got some various, the Molar craft, he's been trying to get that off and running for a couple of decades now at least. And there's some larger aerodynes. The one in the bottom center is an interesting lenticular French aerodyne. Looks like something right out of science fiction you see on an Irwin Allen TV show. Well, essentially it is. And there's the Avro car on the bottom right. And despite some very promising results, that was dropped as a project around the year I was born, 1961. But it's based on some very, very important aerodyne work done by German scientists, Italian scientists, Bolonzo, Schriever, Habermohl, Schauberger. And I've always been fascinated by unconventional flying objects for obvious reasons. And there are various, the lenticular reentry vehicle, LRV, the EKIP, the Molar craft, Locomo Sky Thermoplan, Cousinet, RC-360, the French craft in the bottom center, and the Avro car. Now, on the upper left-hand corner, we have the repulsine, which takes advantage of both the Coanda effect and the tornado principle, tornado power effect that was noticed and built and amplified, this systems found in nature, by Austrian scientist Victor Schauberger. Very important work. He built this, which levitates with unbelievable force. A lot of that force, most of the force, seems to be electrical in nature. That's very important. When you rotate air or water into a spinning motion called, which he called a colloidal, there's a strong electrical gradient present. That's very important. And then top middle is the OTC X1 from Otis T. Carr. Ralph Ring, who was at last year's conference in Holland, talks about that because he worked on that and flew inside one of the manned craft. This is obviously a model. Also an electrovitic craft with a rotor and accumulator inside called a Utron. Very important electrogravitics. And now, on the right side, you see something very, very important to both the Searl effect at high voltage and the Biefeld-Brown effect at high voltage. What you see up there, I don't know if this has a laser. Is there a laser in it? No, I guess not. What you see is a mica disc, very high K-factor dielectric, a thin mica disc that's mobile on a point. Now, what you see on either side are balls of a Wimshurst generator or some similar high voltage electrostatic generator. As soon as the generator is activated, the mica disc assumes a very, very rapid rotation and off it goes. Very important. This should be taught in our schools, in our institutions of learning. It's not. Oh, I forgot to mention, on the bottom left also is a device by Sam Mason? Sam Mason here? I guess not. But anyway, that device is from Mark Tamian. And that was built by copying Professor Searl's technology. Now, Professor Searl's inverse gravity vehicle, which used to be called the levity disc back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, that produces intense cold. By contrast, the Mark Tamian device produces heat, tremendous heat. And those lines are electromagnetic lines of force. There are about 2 or 3 different kinds of rotating fields, a magnetostatic field, a rotating magnetic field, and an electrostatic field. The periphery on these devices is always going to be negative. Electrical charges want to escape from sharp points and adhere to smooth, curved, large surface areas. That's what you want in this form of propulsion. Oh, and the bottom center, I believe that is a NASA concept for a warp drive craft. Electrogravitics is warp drive, whether below the speed of light or above the speed of light. Since these devices are force field propelled, every atom of ship and payload within the field moves at the same rate. There's no freight cars effect, as if you have a point of force coming from somewhere. Every atom of ship and payload moves at the same rate. So you have canceled inertial mass. Gravitational mass is still there, but since they have no inertia, the speed of light is no longer a barrier. It's very important. Now, what you have here is a fish in a river, in a moving current. The fish is able to remain motionless because of its shape and also the way water wants to move in a vortexian action around the fish and the design of the fish's body. Electrogravitic craft copy the design of the fish. Very important. Now, this is one of my craft, which I call beam ships, from my company that I've run since 1999, called Applied Electrogravitics. And that's beam ship variation 1 on the left-hand side. And that is award-winning. It won the Detroit, 10 years ago, the Detroit Metro Science Fair for 3 Dearborn, Michigan high school students who flew me up to Dearborn, Michigan after they bought one of my craft and micro power supplies so that I could supervise their work. And they won the Detroit Metro Science Fair grand prize in physics with the beam ship variation 1. So that design is award-winning, but the patent is, of course, Thomas Townsend Brown's electrokinetic apparatus. That's patent number 2949550. Very important patent. And on to the right of that is one of my beam ships that Sam Mason built and modified a little bit, and that's beam ship variation 5, the 5-footer. That's my messy apartment in '02. The larger you make them, the more force they have. That's one of the tenets of the Biefeld-Brown effect. They just really get up and move with hardly any voltage at all. We make them lightweight for safety. Don't want to shock the life out of anyone. And there I am on the left-hand side there. Mr. John Cornett with the hat is helping me finish 1-to-1 scale model of Professor Searl's levity disk, which today we call an inverse gravity vehicle, and that is same size as the P-series craft, which are about 10-foot, 11-foot diameter. And it shows the inner track is where the SEG housing normally is. Outside of it is the flight cell area. Flight cells control the flight angle and also the speed of the SEG. There's a load cell inside each flight cell. And the whole idea of the inverse gravity vehicle disk body, it's a flight frame for control. The device at the bottom, the SEG, is what flies. It wasn't meant to fly. It was just supposed to be a unique electrical generator that Professor John Searl, when he was only 14 years old, working as an electrical apprentice, had the idea, which came from a series of 2 oddly repeating dreams from age 4 to age 10. I guess that was late 1930s, early 1940s, that he had, that told him the law of the squares, which is a mathematical system, which is basically a kind of a computer. And it's very interesting because if you follow that law, you can build this device which taps the zero-point energy, coheres the random zero-point energy, and that energy potential is just unbelievable. 1 cubic meter of it or less can boil off all our oceans. It's, way more power than you could ever imagine. And there are some IGVs of various sizes flying in and around the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Beautiful city. And yeah, IGB prototypes coming soon. With funding and hard work, anything is possible. And there I am with standing in front of an IGV drawing that I believe J.P. Roos did in 1970, the Starship Ezekiel. It's a 90-foot craft, a 4 to 5-seater craft. And I'm holding a craft that's pretty much based on that exact same profile, C-57D Starship from the movie Forbidden Planet. Anyway, Professor Searl, he's just an amazing man. He's my friend, he's my boss, and I hope everyone here gets to meet him in due time. We were in China at the end of August 2013. We have a new affiliate group, a subsidiary, Searl Energy Group China. And we're at the 4th Global Green Energy Prosperity Forum in Beijing, China. And we're demonstrating the Searl effect with the mock-up and our eddy current demonstrator. Some wonderful people in China that just did us proud. And some very important people in the field. John Searl, Professor John Searl, his invention, the SEG. It was not supposed to be a flying machine, but up it goes. Nothing can hold it down. It's physically impossible. There's negative charge coming off the rim, positive charge in the center. The Earth has a very powerful negative charge at its surface. So you can see if you match that charge, it will be physically impossible to hold it down. It's John Searl, as a young child, who started having those dreams. It's Albert Einstein as a young man. Nikola Tesla, who gave us almost single-handedly our entire electrical 20th century. And some photos of one of the P-series craft, I believe is the P-11, about 10-foot diameter. The whole idea of the craft is a flight frame for control. And they were controlled with 12-meter band ham radio, very powerful. 64, 65 channels of radio control. And bottom left-hand corner is some work back in the 60s with some scale models. Top side of the P-11, some newspaper articles, a lot of press coverage, huge amount of press coverage back in the 60s and 70s. And bottom right is one of the control panels and signal generators used for the craft. Searl National Space Research Consortium, or SNSRC. And there's a little bit about the law of the squares. The law of the squares tells you what elements to use in what proportions, depending on what volume of space you want to fill with Searl effect generator, or SEG. The name SEG, or Searl effect generator, came from Dr. Shinichi Seiki, who was involved at that time in the early 70s, late 60s. In 1972, he wrote the principles of ultra-relativity, the principles of ultra-relativity that explain the operation of this craft, where conventional science was stymied in its explanation of the craft. The craft, the SEG and the craft obey all the laws of physics as taught. There are no physical laws being broken. It's just a deeper understanding and utilization of physics. The law of the squares is based on supersymmetry. Like light, magnetism is broken down to its spectrum components, you see upper right-hand corner, then utilized to generate a resonant magnetic wave. A resonant magnetic wave. We'll see that again and again. That's very, very important to understand what's going on. Now you see the squares. 2 times 2 is 4. Everything is on this technology is based on 2 squared. Well, 2 squared is 4. So you have 4 horizontals and 4 verticals. If you have the numbers in the square sequential, you get random outputs from the horizontals, the verticals, and the diagonals. But if you randomize the numbers, you get uniform outputs from the horizontals, diagonals, and verticals. That's a mathematical representation of what the SEG does. It converts the random energy, which is staggering potential, into coherent electrical force and torque and motion. Very important. Now, this is the basic structure of the SEG. Inner layer is the collector of electrons. That's positive. Electrons want to seek out a positive source. They can't help it. It's just basic physics. Opposites attract. So electrons are sucked in a vortexian action, even when there's no relative movement. You put probes on the inner layer and the outer layer, you'll get a potential, even when there's no movement at all. Rotation enhances that effect markedly. So you get a positive layer on the inside. Rare earths like neodymium have lots of, or not lots, a couple extra electrons on their valence shells, their atomic shells, their outer 4f and 5f band shells. And those are very mobile. And rare earths like neodymium greedily suck up and readily emit those electrons. Then you have a gating layer of a plastic material to act as an insulator. Then you have an electron accelerator that's magnetized with the Coca-Cola formula, which is basically a linear motor. This is a linear motor, of which there are several out there. Look on YouTube, you can find them. And we have an outer layer which has to be paramagnetic, so you get no friction when you start getting the rotation. Now, what you have is two fields at right angles. You have a field at x-axis on the stator, which is the ring, and a field at y-axis on the roller or runner. You get two fields printed with sinusoidal currents at right angles. They're 90 degrees out of phase. That's a two-phase motor. Those rollers can't help but start rotating around. You got to have two fields at right angles or it won't work. They orbit and rotate. And of course, the copper conductor layer has to be conductive, but paramagnetic. So you get eddy currents that cause the rollers to be repelled. So you get a balance of forces between the attraction of the iron layer and the stator and the roller, attraction, and linear motoring, and repulsion of the eddy currents. And we have an eddy current demonstrator with us, of course. Many of you have already seen that. Highly recommend stop by one of our booths and check it out. So what you have in the red, the bottom center, is a rotating magnetic wave when those two fields, the field on the stator and the field on the rotor, are combined, which acts like an Archimedes water screw. It's a rotating magnetic field. So you have two sinusoidal waves at right angles. They're 90 degrees out of phase. See how they intersect at zero line? That's why you get motion. It's motion of a magnetic field, a rotating magnetic field. Well, Nikola Tesla, when he was a young child, got the idea of the rotating magnetic field, and that gave us polyphase AC, our entire electrical 20th century. And there's the mock-up on the bench, and on the scope you can see the sinusoidal current. There's a Searl effect generator. The original name was something very ungainly, gyro, flywheel, ball race device, high energy density magnetic device. Shinichi Seiki said, why not just call it the Searl effect generator, or SEG for an acronym? And the name stuck. Now, there's a 3-ring generator. All you need is just one to demonstrate the concept. One plate, plate number 1, the innermost one, and one runner. Ideally, you need 12 runners on the inner plate. And you have coils at the periphery, which generate electricity in the conventional manner by cutting lines of magnetic force. That's all. But you have the added benefit of electron flux radially through the SEG, pumping electrons into the coils. So just like T. Henry Moray's of Salt Lake City's radiant energy accumulator, you get cold currents. You get negative resistance. And negative resistance produces cold. Positive resistance, which is all our current systems of power, produces heat. A negative state is very healthy. We want electrons and negative ions in our environments. They become standard in hospital operating theaters and homes to clean the air. Dirt, dust, and bacteria just drop right out of the air. Again, there's the SEG mock-up. It's the reverse of the actual SEG. The SEG itself is a magnetic prime mover. Of course, reverse that, and you have an electric motor. An electric motor and electric generator are opposites of the same thing. There's SEG, an expanding flux of electricity, negative ions coming off the rim. So the positive is on the innermost layer, the negative polarity is on the outermost layer. The more load you put on the SEG, the faster it will run, and the more power you can get from it. Nominal operating voltage of the SEG is about 100,000 volts at a very low amperage, about maybe 1.5 milliamps. When you get higher and higher voltages, you get a vacuum around the SEG. The higher the voltage, the stronger the vacuum. At anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million volts, no air can come near the SEG. It's just pushed away. And there's a letter from Mr. George Uhlig. Dear Mr. Searl, I have the responsibility for U.S. Air Force propulsion and energy conversion research and development interests in Europe and is presently located in the European Office of Aerospace Research and Development, London, England. One of our Air Force organizations, the United States, I guess other Air Force in the United States, has requested a copy of your report, apparently authored by you, entitled Disc-Shaped Type of Flying Craft. If it is possible to send me a copy of this report at no charge to the government, no charge to the government. Yeah, what's the government doing in Washington doing right now? They're not doing squat. It's a broken system. If it is possible to send me a copy, no charge, I would appreciate it. Or if you prefer, I could copy it and return it to you. Good luck with that. Yeah, right? Either way, we would like to have the opportunity of acquiring this report. So the military would be very derelict if they were not interested in this technology. And they're not derelict. U.S. Air Force, interest in propulsion and energy conversion research. Oh yeah. The SEG is a converter of random electrons. You could think of little pieces of vacuum, as Tom Bearden calls them, as pre-electrons. Those pre-electrons house enormous quantity of harder electrons, which normally surround every atom. The SEG is a converter of that random energy of the ether or 0 point into useful energy. Anyway, Dr. George Uhlig earned his doctorate degree in '72 under Henry Eyring while a career U.S. Air Force officer. George worked on his doctoral research and simultaneously handled projects of greater interest to the Air Force. After retiring from the Air Force in 1983, with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, George was the head of research and development for Hercules Aerospace at the Bacchus Works in Magna, Utah. Dugway Proving Ground is in Utah. Taught college chemistry courses at Salt Lake Community College, then College of Eastern Utah and Price. At CEU, he founded the only science research program at the college and inspired many students to pursue advanced education in the sciences and engineering. Great job if you can get it. George retired from the CEU in 2008, and you can check that out online. Now, if you want to go into space with much less cost, much safer, much faster than any rocket, this is the design that seems to work the best. Very interesting. It's in our zeitgeist. It's in our collective consciousness. I believe at a certain point in a society's development, wherever life exists in the universe, and we're discovering new planets all the time, this type of propulsion will be developed. We developed this type of propulsion decades and decades and decades ago. Low tech, like the A-bomb, low tech. And there's a diagram of a single-seater craft, say a fighter craft, a reconnaissance craft, maybe about 35 feet in diameter. At the edge is a rim discharge pin coming off one of the flight cells right at the flame barrier area. In this type of propulsion, you want to eject electrons from the rim, just like that Ducrochet disc, the mica disc, that starts rotating and then flying off when it's presented with high voltage. Just like that. 64 struts, 64 flight cells or flight control cells, and landing legs. There's one of a model IGV, levity disk, inverse gravity vehicle that was built back in the day, 40 years ago perhaps. There's the last craft built. I believe it was on the land of the late Alfred Fleetwood in Berkshire, UK, Berkshire, England. And that craft, Professor Searl said, well, let's put clear shells on it and then run a fine wire grid for the electrical happenings on the underside of it. This is very important. This was 7 meters in diameter, about 21 feet. And this had a really good control system, best flight cells ever. This was taken off and flown around the world and whipped around the speeds far faster than any rocket with no inertia. Of course, for a manned craft, you have to provide a life support system because no air can come near the craft. Flight voltage is around 1 teravolt. Whatever the energy of the craft, the current never exceeds 1.5 milliamperes. High energy electrostatics. High energy electrostatics is identical to a gravitational field. There's your unified field theory. The unifying field is the electrical field because you can create gravity and magnetism. There's some pictures of past work, photographs. And up on top is one of the magnetized segments of a runner or roller. Everything has to be precise. There's Sue Justice in miniskirt standing on top of the almost completed Demo 1 craft, the 21-footer. And Professor Searl is a young man. It's about 40 years ago, building it in Berkshire. Some of the team of the Searl National Space Research Consortium, or the SNSRC. No noise, no pollution, no heat, no vibration, no consumption of Earth's oxygen, no need to carry fuel, no runways, no launch pads. Professor Searl says, we are the tomorrow people, the decision makers. You better believe it. Tomorrow's transportation today. Development research by the Searl National Space Research Consortium UK. And now we're all over the world. We have subsidiaries in Australia, China, all over the place for obvious reasons. In 1968, this was the P-11 craft. Planned to develop such a vehicle for commercial use for deep space exploration. There's no limit to the speed, as far as we know. And since there's no inertia, the speed of light shouldn't be a barrier any more than the speed of sound was a barrier to Chuck Yeager and the Bell Aerospace X-1 rocket plane back in October 1947. 67 years ago. First SEGs were built at British Rewinds and Repairs in London in 1946 by the team of engineers there. And there's a P-11 in a field in Warminster. You can go to that field and see where the craft were flown. Mostly flown from Warminster. The P-11 was stored in Archangel, Russia, because there was no place to house it for safety in the UK. 41 of these were built between 1954 to and flown 1954 and 1978. And each new iteration of the craft utilized the same Searl effect generator. Remember, it was not supposed to be a flying machine, just a unique type of electrical power generator. And this craft weighed, without being powered, it weighed about 4.5 tons, 4.5 tons. And the 21-footer was about 12 tons. Some newspaper articles on the work. 1979, 1960s. A lot of interest. Mr. Searl expects to offer day trips to the moon, and he's serious. Oh yeah. Get to the moon in about an hour or less. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, there's the 3D printing. 3D printers are revolutionizing life here on Earth, and they will continue to do so in space. We'll have a 3D printer to make any parts we need on board the flying craft. Food, clothing, organs, splints. replacement parts, and so much more. Every IGV, inverse gravity vehicle, Searl IGV, will come standard with a 3D printer workstation. You better believe it. Wave of the future. And this is the IGV control mechanism. There is one of the radio controlled power panels that was not mobile. They also had a mobile panel. It was very large, military surplus. If you're conversant with radio frequency and electronics, all this is pretty much second nature to you. And that's the setup at 17 St. Stephen's Close, Mortimer. Some of the equipment you've seen and the TV newsreels. All this was covered by the BBC, BBC One, Southern Television, Anglia. And here are 6 frames taken with a motor drive camera in rapid succession. The P11 flying in Warminster, England. And that's about 10-foot diameter, same size as a model I built for 3 years ago at the Tesla Symposium in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he's not afraid of that 4.5-ton device falling on him. The Earth just pushes it away. He did demonstrations. There were, hundreds of witnesses. They were usually on Sundays, Sunday afternoon flight demonstrations. He would rush models at the ground. As soon as they got near the ground, they would just curve right up and keep on going to the sound of applause. They rush models at the house. They can't hit anything, can't hit buildings with this. The field just pushes it away. There's a strong repulsion field from the rim that repels the Earth and anything else approaching the rim. Conversely, there's an attraction field at the hub. If the drive is switched on suddenly, it'll take up a chunk of sod. They'll stick to the bottom of the craft. High energy electrostatics. Remember, identical to a gravitational field. At these insane voltages, you get weird things happening. But not weird if you know physics, standard physics. So 6 frames in rapid succession. The BBC has reams of flight footage. In the 1990s, when interest in the work reawakened, they wanted insane amounts of money for the footage. Now, they won't even admit it exists, which insults a lot of people who are my age who remember it. And there's some of the newer team, Professor Searl, in the late 90s, early 2000s, with some models, standing on top of the not P11, the Demo 1. The Demo 1 was deliberately built out of wood, the weakest material available, to silence detractors and scientists who said such a structure would never support its own weight. You can make it out of cardboard. Once it's at flight voltage, superconducting, the SEG is superconducting by putting a load on it with the load cells, which is inside each of the 64 flight cells. Once you have that voltage, there are no stresses whatsoever. What you do have at flight voltage inside the center is 1/2 G onboard gravity. So if you weigh 200 pounds on board the craft, when it's energized at flight voltage, you only weigh 100 pounds. And no sensation of motion. Nothing. You don't feel anything. Right angle turns, instant starts and stops, you feel nothing. Plus, no sonic boom. Why no sonic boom? Because of the electrical field. Yeah, Northrop Corporation did experiments with high voltage electrified airfoils, and they found that not only was skin heating eliminated, sonic boom and shock waves are eliminated too. So that's why you fly multi-Mach with this thing, no sonic boom. And there's Starport Earth 1, Professor Searl, commanding the craft in flight. They're controlled by various ground stations around the world with special code, 12-meter band ham radio. And there's the mock-up that you can see at our booth of the newest ones. Was supposed to go to China, but there just wasn't enough time. So, but we have it here for your viewing pleasure. Just stop by our booth, say hi. Very cool graphic by our team. Ball races develop incredible energy. In the SEG, this energy is also converted into electrical energy. Now, there's been a lot of experiments done by Bruce De Palma of the N Machine, homopolar motor, and others, found out why You can get incredible energy right from space. The spin of an object connected to its environment. Its environment is the ether, or universal cosmic energy. We call it zero-point energy in physics today. Staggering amounts of energy all around us, all the time. The inverse gravitational vehicle utilizes gravity technology, gyroscopic technology, flywheel technology, cyclotron technology, electrical technology, magnetic wave technology, and ball race technology, all in one. And this came from a couple of dreams. How strange and wonderful is the universe. And there's a little look at the asymmetrical waveform capacitance that's part of the effect. 64 struts, 64 flight cells or flight control cells. Ever since there have been people, there have been explorers looking at places where others hadn't been before. Not everyone does it, but we are all part of a species where some members of the species do. They're not idle dreamers. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I grew up with in the Bronx, he tutored me in algebra. We're very good friends, still very good friends today. Reaching for the Stars, America's Choice, Natural History magazine, April 2003, a little over 10.5 years ago. Proposed spacesuit for IGV flight crews. Now, time sweep power unit supply test equipment requirements. Multi-range meter resistance of 20 kiloohms per volt, e.g. an avometer Model 8, oscilloscope, high voltage Mark IIB or equivalent, components to make up the input networks. Components to make up the load for the Mark IIB, a delayed pulse synchronizer type 173/2 or type 192872. Full list of components available at searlaerospace.com, and that site also has all the new books and info, and you can really get an education if you go to searlaerospace.com. The inverse gravity vehicle utilizes gravity waves found in nature throughout the cosmos. Gravity is a particle and a wave, just like a photon, a wavicle. SEG generates a toroidal electrodynamic field. It generates about 3 or 4 different kinds of fields, a high voltage electrostatic field, a high energy rotating magnetic field, a magnetostatic field, which induces an ordinary magnetic field of like polarity in anything approaching it. So also anything approaching it would be repelled with irresistible force. It's what we call a force field. And this is how space-time is bent. Space-time, thing about space-time that's really great for us is that it's an elastic medium. You can squash it, you can expand it, and you can utilize this effect of space-time to travel anywhere you want in our universe in reasonable time and economy in real time. Go to Alpha Centauri on a 2-month jaunt, come back, your friends and relatives won't be any older than you. Can't get that with ordinary rocket technology, what we call impulse drive. This is warp drive, not impulse rocket drive. Nice little Fibonacci spiral there. Now, here's IGVs at your airport. A lot of people flew in by air. How'd you like to get anywhere on the Earth in 30 minutes or less? You can do it with Professor Searl's technology.
And you wouldn't need an airport.
Well, you still need an airport, but you wouldn't have to break the bank of your airline company on ever-rising fuel costs.
No landing strip.
And no pollution. No pollution. No chemtrails. Well, that's a separate issue. But a lot of chemtrails yesterday. Everybody see the chemtrails yesterday? Crazy. As the IGV becomes more commonplace, new IGV spaceports will be needed to optimize air traffic safety. Professor John Searl has outlined plans to create the perfect IGV installation for global transatmospheric transportation. The first IGVs will be unmanned UAVs, and then we will gradually upscale the designs while outfitting with life support systems, because at those voltages, there's no air. The higher the voltage, the stronger the vacuum. And there's that aforementioned single-seater, the inverse gravity vehicle, and the SEG is enlarged greatly for clarity. And there it is with its shells on. And the shells are normally connected to the positive side of the generator. So they're acting like giant aerials to suck in electrons to the innermost neodymium layer of plate number 1. And there's the rib structure. 64 struts, 64 flight cells. Everything's based on 8, the game of hopscotch. Well, 8 squared is 64. Very important. There's the IGV structure with the SEG drive, Searl effect generator drive unit inside. The SEG is the thing that flies. The IGG is just a flight frame for control. There's the cabin. And there's a seat. Wouldn't need seat belts. There's a workstation on board the manned IGV. Now, there's a toroidal field that you get when you're at flight voltage. Now, there could be a teravolt. There's about a teravolt, 10 to the 12 volts at 1.5 milliamps on the skin of the craft. If you touch that, you're dead. But inside the craft, you're in the eye of the hurricane. You're safe. Voltages and charges want to stick to the outside of an enclosed conductor. You're safe inside. You're in the eye of the hurricane. The SEG can promote sustainable energy generation during terraforming water purification. There's Mons Olympus on Mars, one of the largest volcanoes, and if not largest volcano in the solar system, in our Sol system. It's the flight cells. There's a large, you can make these as large as you want. Flying hotels. Large-scale Ezekiel interior will be customizable to suit various mission parameters and can also act as a permanent orbital research station, complete with ISS docking ports, International Space Station docking ports, at much reduced cost. Professor John Searl, my boss, our boss at Team Searl, STI, Man Who Saved Tomorrow. On the left-hand side, would you like to breathe that air and drink that water? Or would you like the right-hand side? No brainer. Now, here's some animation that one of our team did. I believe it was Chuck Middaugh or Kevin Ballmer. Chuck Middaugh. There's the lower and upper hatches. Egress is obviously through the lower hatch. SEG drive. We'll take a tour inside the craft. There's some screens, 3D and normal screens, some flight stations, workstations. And off we go on the next Searl IGV mission to explore space or learn more about our Earth. Any speed you want, much faster than any rocket. From VTOL hovering to speeds far faster than any impulse drive rocket. IGV, Searl Aerospace, Inc. Seek with all learning, love overrules war. Now, we have a little short film, about 12 minutes, 10, 12 minutes. Are we over time?
Right on time, 4:44, man.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll take a look at that, give you a little idea, see the man himself. And he is just an incredible human being. Best boss I will ever have. And he's a great friend, probably my best friend. All our best friends, all of humanity's best friend. There are rumors. Not yet. But anything's possible. Now, we need some audio on this. I don't know if the audio is going to come up. Yeah, there we go. This is a 12-minute excerpt from the John Searl Story DVD, which you can download or purchase from the johnsearlstory.com website. Highly recommend you take a look at that.
An SEG is a device that converts the energy around you, that's everywhere, into useful energy, what we call electricity.
The generator is a magnetic device that is totally magnetic. It is its own prime mover. It will self-start and continue to run, and as far as we know, we can say never stop.
We have something here that needs to be investigated, and really that's my role. I am a technical investigator of the SEG.
The generator is approximately 2 foot in diameter by about 8 inches high, and it can be put in the home to power your home. It can be put in your automobile to power your automobile.
The British government said they know about it, but they think it's a novelty.
Many of the third world countries have no means of generating electricity. These units could be put in there and power whole communities.
You really have to take a look at each individual component and function. And when you step back, you say, wow, this thing works. There's too much for it. There's too many facets involved not to be something viable.
I felt that the big generators at the power station were a waste of money, would present to us vast pollution problems in the future. So the whole idea was to get something simple, not difficult to produce, and produce electricity.
With a series of coils attached to it, you can supply a home or an automobile or any device you want that runs on electricity at any voltage or power that you require. This particular device actually emits electrons. It does so through an exchange from a rare earth to lighter elements as it goes out. It's also amplified, and as it comes out, you have a tremendous abundance of electrons which are actually pumping into the coils instead of just bumping them forward a notch as a conventional generator would do. The primary component is a rare earth, and it can be, although it can be any of the rare earths, the component that we use is neodymium. That's element number 60 on the periodic chart. And that unit puts out an excess of electrons for some reason, and it will also replenish them very easily.
Well, I've been playing with this, with equipment. I've uncovered a lot of things which I suspected but couldn't prove. Clearly, the magnetic field was completely different to the magnetic fields we knew of. We got fields at right angles. That's why the whole thing moves. If you haven't got two fields, it won't move.
As the rollers move, they provoke electrons to migrate from the neodymium to the various layers.
So we know that the magnetic field can be set to perform functions.
The electron flow is accelerated to an extremely high rate, and it creates a vacuum around the device. And in that vacuum, you develop numbing cold. And numbing cold, as we know today, is a function of superconductivity. It also, which has not been known, a function of gravitational force.
The three-seater craft, which we've been asked to do, it will be a 90-foot diameter vehicle. Here we had something we couldn't understand. It wasn't doing what I wanted. That's what a generator I wanted.
It will dive down in temperature at one point if you build it correctly and actually levitate and actually lift off the Earth, developing its own gravitational field.
This thing wanted to fly. So to me then, the easiest thing was to work on a body. Let it fly. And we toyed with this down in Warminster, where we built these, what was labelled UFOs. We called them levity discs, but we built this. Now, 13 old-age men backed that project, and they only backed me on the following condition, that I did not go commercial with this. They didn't want any problems with taxman. They were doing this for fun. But to me, that was all right. That was giving me a chance to experiment.
We have had at least 41 flight vehicles to date. Yes, they've been tested, and the offer we're now making, we are guaranteeing will fly.
It will weigh roughly 90 tons on completing. And made it quite clear to them it was not a UFO. The government knows It's identified, they know what it is. Every government knows what it is. They've known it for years. Here, behind me, you see an illustration of something similar to the effects that are happening around the Searl effect generator. This energy is all around us. It is like this battery. We have electrons pulled to one end so that we can make them flow in a particular manner. If we take a plate and we make our roller like the battery, but just slightly different, that it takes this energy into this, it will then rotate around this plate. Not only rotate around the plate, it also rotates around its own axis. This was made for the Washington Conference of Future Energy in Washington, D.C. a few years back. It had no intention of anything moving that wasn't intended. All we wanted to prove that the scientists were wrong. You could get 12 magnetic units to stick on that ring and they would not fall off. We have a plain board here. We got a plate with no power whatsoever. We have a copper outer surface. What we need to do, we got to somehow get power from here to here. First of all, we need rollers. And we would like the lady to examine for any secret batteries in them.
No batteries.
No batteries?
Nothing but...
Just a lump of metal. What we could do is ask the lady to put the roller units back in to not flying off yet. 3, no flying off. 4, no flying, no excitement yet. 10, 11, and the 12th disciple just going in. No launching has taken place. Scientists must be wrong. Now we need to get some voltage across here to find out how much power will it take to make them move and if they will fly off. We've now got some voltage available. So the lady kindly try to move, see if one will move. Ready for the launching? Get there, we're nearly there. And we give it a little bit more push. And we're away, look at them. You see them shooting off everywhere. Where are they going? Nobody knows. Are they going to heaven or are they going to hell? Those explosive rollers there. Good God, they're coming and breathing faster than we're losing them. How about that? Oh, let's see how many we left with. Well, stop the door to the park and we'll see. There's nothing. That's a fast breather. We've still got 12 rollers. How's that? The question here is, there's no power on here. But power must come across there to make that roller set. It can't go that way, you're blowing running fuses. If it went that way, it comes from that way to this way. And that means somebody's wrong. Now, either I'm hallucinating. If I am, I don't know what I've had. I'm not on drugs, and I'm sure the lady's not on drugs, and I'm sure our engineer's not. What we see is motion of metal, and they keep going as long as we can draw power across from that plate to that connecting unit here. So, FB and friends, take note. We are happy that you've given us this welcome on the internet, making people look at us, which we are unable to do. My blessing with you, son. Keep it up. There's nothing like it. We are here. Now we'd like to show another interesting effect. Why do we use copper? And you don't know. I'm going to tell you why.
The johnsearlstory.com. johnsearlstory.com. You download the video or purchase the DVD. Came out in early 2009 from Bradley Lockerman Films, Los Angeles, California. First of all, this last minute, I want to take a minute to thank the GlobalBEM for hosting Searl Technologies again. At the first GlobalBEM, or I lectured in Holland last year, we were able to find an investor that invested significant monies in the R&D effort to reproduce the Searl effect generator. And because of that, we're having our best year ever. So if you have a technology company, thank you. Yeah, right on. Power to the people, indeed. If you have an energy company, you have an invention, this is the place to be. GlobalBEM. You can get funding. I want to thank all our STI, Searl Technology Incorporated affiliates all over the world. I want to thank, of course, my boss, our friend, Professor John Searl, who's 82 years old, working very hard in England right now. And take the last 30 seconds to do a little audience participation, to have a little fun. Would you like to have cheap, clean energy?
Yeah.
I can't hear you. Yeah. That's more like it. Would you like to have warp-driven starships? I can't hear you. Well, we can have that. Talk to Mr. Bradley Lockerman. Talk to me. Talk to any of Team Searl. We can make a prosperous and wonderful present and future. The SEG and the inverse gravity vehicle, also by John Searl, are here right now. I'm Russell Anderson from Searl Technologies Incorporated, soon to be moving to Southern California so I can work on this full time. It's already here. That's how you manifest. It's already here. You must believe that in your heart and soul. That's the manifestation. That's how the universe works.
Thank you so much, Russell. And he didn't know what was going on. Back there, we've been running around, scurrying around with 3 different computers, trying to get John Searl on for just a moment so we could all show him our deep appreciation. But I think it's about 1 in the morning. He's probably snoozing and not noticing what's popping up on Skype. But we gave it a try. We weren't able to pull it off, though. But thank you so much for sharing this incredible body of his life's work. Unbelievable. Thank you. We're running about 15 minutes behind schedule because we really wanted to try to get him on and also to allow you to see his work via this video. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah. Okay, good. We have one more presentation before dinner. And just to set it up, a few years ago, I interviewed a man named John Burke, and I was fascinated with his research in the field of charging seeds to have super crops. His research took him to far parts of the world, and that's the subject of today's conversation with Jason Matozzo and also Dan Winter, who we're going to Skype in. I believe he's still in Europe right now. What Burke found was that the seeds that he charged at the world's known energy vortices, such as Stonehenge, were producing incredibly viral effects, enough that it can change the way we feed this planet. That's what we're going to talk about today, is the why of that with Jason. As Dan Winter joins in the conversation, we'll take a look at universal fractal electric symmetry of all of life force generation, the pinecone principle. So, is Jason here? Jason. We'll take a breath until Jason shows up. Okay, we have 5 minutes before Jason Matozzo is going to show up. So take a little break.
Radio show, but I'm also a contractor, and I've been wanting to start implementing.
Thanks for trying.
Energy as an option. We've been making our houses so that we can retrofit easily. Put them hookups for. Yes. Interested? Are you ready to produce generators?
John's timeline. That's my card for the film company. It's actually Searl Technology Incorporated, Florida. We have SMI in San Diego and SAC and our partners around the world. We just got back from Beijing, China, for the SAGC and the SSA. China, we think, is going to be a very powerful partner because they're in dire need of a change in their paradigm. It's just, you've been to Beijing. You get off the plane, you take 3 steps, and you can have the metallic taste from their air in their mouth. So, and they're fully aware of that. Say hello to Terry. Craig Ricketts. Craig Ricketts has our Mexico licensee. Samuel Mason from our team. Terry is a developer, among other things. He has a blog radio show, and just getting an intro here.
I'd definitely be interested in somebody doing a spot on the show.
Can get
The show's
John
called Walls in Our Minds.
I've done over the last 3.5 years 105 broadcasts with him. And the biggest one, of course, was 3 hours we spent with George Moray. You remember that?
Yeah, beautiful.
So yes, we can probably get him for you. He does have a hearing problem. He's clinically deaf, but he can handle it with the headset. The radio situation. That's why I do it a lot with him, because he's tuned into my voice, and I can hear and interpret sometimes for him. Short question, keep your show.
So I do my show for my computer on Skype. So
yeah, no, we've done many.
Dan Winter. It's a co-presentation. It's about 12:30 in France. That's not the issue. For some reason, they cannot get through to him, so he is not available to do this presentation, which Jason was going to augment. So I can say this in lieu of it, at least on part of it. If we're talking about the seed charging part, which Dan was going to talk about, this life force issue, you can go to GuyMTV.com and look in the CMN, Conscious Media Network archives at your own leisure. You can get a free pass to view anything on GuyMTV. And you can find my interview with John Burke, where we spoke at length about his work before he died. It was one of the few interviews you will ever find on his work, because he had to kind of go undercover on it. And it's absolutely fascinating what he was able to do with these seeds charged at sacred locations at these particular vortex points that I was mentioning before. So GuyMTV.com, get a free pass if you don't already belong to Guyam, and look for Conscious Media Network Archives, CMN, my interview with John Burke. Okay? So you're going to be first in line for dinner. I'm so sorry it didn't work out with Dan. We'll see if he can maybe pop up later in the weekend, but for now, it's kind of a bust. So have a glass of water, a glass of wine, a little bit of dinner early, whatever. Thank you so much. And we'll convene after dinner with Sasha Stone for the discussion, the panel discussion. Thank you.